I volunteered.
Give me a second here.
Cool. Well, Anton said we should start without him, so
We're live.
all right. Suppose we should probably just jump right in, huh?
Why not? Take it away, Dave.
Good morning, everyone. Budget 2021. I'm sure everyone's had a chance to look through the micro numbers. I put a little macro sheet together. Something new that was on your table this morning is the how we doing this year, because it's kind of a special year. And you can see we were closed for May. April was a cancellation month. And then once we opened in June, it's been gangbusters. Everyone's pretty aware of these trends in the outdoor recreation and park use, state park use, trails, camping, all that is just all in demand. And we're in really good shape, I think, for what could have been a really bad year. The big question is, what lies ahead? September and October, books are really strong, probably stronger than last year. The Canadian cancellations have been quickly snapped up. Midweeks are stronger. Tenting is what's really thriving. And so I am pretty much, without any sort of catastrophic state intervention or local closure, sort of tracked our rest of the season to trend at that 3 to 9% up, which would still put us shy, I think, of last year's mark of like 1.26 is what we finished at last year with just the campground. And we might not make it this year. We put in 1.25. We'll come really close to that, but we might not make that either.
But a lot of schools are not going back, right? Do people get Wi-Fi down in the park?
Not enough to do schoolwork at the
Okay.
sites. Like there's a free signal, just like a hotspot around the office.
Okay.
And that gets used for conferencing and a little bit of business, but you
Okay.
couldn't do school in the park.
I've seen a lot of people doing that, sitting outside working
Yeah,
on stuff.
we've got, picnic tables and,
Maybe we should put computers and Wi-Fi in the rec park in the building, right?
no, the building's closed.
Tutoring
so-
center,
Tutoring center.
Yeah,
$50 an hour, You make up your difference, sir.
Might not be the mission, but we can.
but it's been an
Definitely
adaptive
make some
year.
money.
It's been a challenging year. The staff has been very solid. I really want to, recognize their commitment and their hard work and positive attitude that it has taken to be in operations. We've been feeling that from the guests, though. The appreciation and the gratitude has been more this year than ever. So things are in good shape.
Do you feel that you have more people that are new to the campground this year, Dave, than
sure.
probably before?
For sure.
Okay.
Young families. Yeah, the whole staycation is the term, but it's, drive up from the cities, versus flying. And that's been very common. Tenters, like I had mentioned before, like the young families with tents, and we only have 50-some tent sites. We have 250 RV sites. I see a trend of the tent sites renting an RV site just to get in on a Wednesday night or a Tuesday night.
Huh.
Our tent sites have, always been the soft market. When you look at the past years, we're known as an RV park. Any given weeknight, we would have a number of tent sites available. Not this year. And we've got tenters paying, $50 a night for an RV site. That's what's sort of filled in these numbers and brought July up, and August is going to be up. September's going to be up.
So those,
So-
I'm sorry,
Go
Dave.
go ahead.
Those newer people, if they're enjoying it,
They're loving it. I hope they come
will
back.
come back then, is my guess.
That's the industry's, optimism. Is like, oh, people are rediscovering camping or getting back or starting to camp,
Yep.
and that's only going to show growth in the future.
Yeah.
And I've had that, anecdotally when they check out, they just love it here. They can hardly wait to come back. They're sort of confirming that.
question for you then. So looking at the numbers that we've got in front of us, you know, the April and May numbers, those are ouchy. You know, they're pretty painful to look at. And then June, July, you know, those are some pretty big numbers going back into the pot too. So we look at July, you know, that increase that, you know, you're talking probably a 12-13% increase over last year, going from 270 to 307, and then you're saying for August average, you're currently trending 3% up.
That's right.
So then, if we continued at that 3% over last year, kind of average for the rest of the year, that still leaves us at a pretty significant undershot from what we made last year.
50 or so.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm just making sure that I was understanding and doing my math right for that. So really, we need to just keep our fingers crossed for September and October to be nice.
Yeah. Yeah, currently I believe we're about $60,000 off of last year's
Yep.
pace.
Good. That's where I'm at too.
We might pick up 6 to 10 in August. We might pick up 10 in September. You know, there's some room to grow, especially in September and October.
Okay. And so we budgeted.
Well, we went into this June down to 120.
Yeah.
We're making up some pretty impressive ground, which is really good to see. So the budget for 2019, or for 2020 for the Parks Department. What do you think about that? Do you feel that number that we budgeted is still going to be doable with revenues that we're seeing and predicting?
The 1.28, I think we were at. Are we going right to the revenue there on the,
960? Or is it?
where are we looking, Jay? The 2021 recreation revenue, bottom line, like 1.286?
Yeah. How does that?
It's ambitious. It's saying, you know, we'll do better than this year. But I think if we adjust our rates a bit more from a, you know, what's always been a 1 or 3% margin, maybe we shoot more of a 3 to 5% margin because of demand. Yeah, Mike's got the regression curve here.
Okay, this is probably answers my question.
It
'Cause
it doesn't answer your question, but it adds a little perspective to the idea of how we're gonna do next year.
yeah. So my concern
We have to
is.
start with some assumptions that are pretty important to answering that question. So if we start with the assumption that we get to be open next year for the whole season with virtually the same operating plan that we're working with right now, then there's no reason to believe we can't get back on track to the type of business we were doing in the past, because we've seen it now for a couple of months, that it's what we would have expected, even a little busier. So if you look at what's the number we've built in for 21, what do we think's going to happen in 20? Well, it's a dip, right? And honestly, this is the first dip we've had in a very long time. But if you look at the curve, it's still pretty reasonable to think that if we're open all year next year, we should be able to hit the number Dave's talking about. And for the reasons he's saying, too. Our demand will stay strong, maybe not quite as strong as we've got this last couple months, and we'll make some strategic rate increases. And that's been our strategy, so if we're allowed to operate that way again, we think we should be able to make it. So let's play with some of those assumptions and think about risk factors here. If we're not allowed, for some reason, next year to operate the way that we have in the past, and we talked about that earlier this year, the idea that maybe bathhouses would be closed, or we'd have to limit our numbers in some way, then, well, you can see what happens by just looking at May and June, and it's potentially disastrous. So I think the chances of it being that bad for a whole season is really small based on what's happening right now. But we can't ignore it. So then what would we do if we had a year, again next year, where COVID was still interrupting our business in a way that really hit the revenues? The rec park has just over $500,000 of the revenues planned to fund general fund operations, basically, writing down property taxes. And so one response that you could have would be to not count on as much of those revenues to write down property taxes. Another response is the rec fund has about $140,000 of capital in their expense budget. That's money that we're not necessarily planning on spending as cash in 2021, but rather we're setting aside to make sure that we can afford to replace all of our capital items on a schedule that we've determined. And, well, that's a strategy that we leave that money in the budget. If we don't make the revenues, we just don't fund that for a year, that capital expenditure. The rec park also has a significant savings account that capital money has been put into that we're going to use to make capital purchases. And that savings account could also be rated as an emergency fund if we needed to continue operations. So I think we've got some strategies that'll help if there's a terrible year next year. But I think there's reason for optimism here too, just looking at the past couple of months, that we're once again in a business that whatever horrible thing is going on in the world, this seems to be the place people want to be. This is the activity people want to do. Kudos to Dave and his staff, and I think that this has been really good.
So I have a question on these sheets. Everything at the top is listed 2019 budget, 2019 year-to-date.
Oh,
I noticed
These-
that too. I think it's,
Wrong.
I just need to go fix the headings. It's
So it's-
1 year more than what it says.
Okay,
Yeah,
That's kind of what I figured.
so it's 2020 budget, 2020 year-to-date.
right.
And these are numbers through July, Kim?
The expense amounts are year-to-date in August, so we still don't have the bills that we would approve tonight in
Okay.
there.
Revenue is through July.
Correct.
And that's, the last column is the projected 2021 budget.
Right.
How are the marinas doing? Or how's the marina doing there, Dave?
you know, it's a small operation. It's really impacted by weather more than anything. It's been a nice hot summer. We've seen good boat traffic starting July. With the Canadian border closure, though, we've missed out on the circle touring yachts and the motor trawlers and the Canadian traffic, you know. So I think I haven't done a real quick or a close look between the 2 years, but I think it's down slightly from last year. Isle Royal didn't open till late June, so that put us off in June from a lot of Bayfield boats that usually go out to the Isle. So I think we're down a little.
But that's stereotypically the marina's been accountable for $20,000 to $30,000 profit, right?
Yeah, it's very small.
Yeah, so,
We usually only budget it for about 10
right.
in profit, and then if it makes a little more, that's great. If not,
It's a hobby.
Yeah. But it's a service.
But that said, we did see a 75-foot yacht from Chicago that would have put on 1,500 gallons of diesel had we been bigger and more accommodating. And that's something the captain kind of shared with me as I got a lot of friends with a lot of big boats, and it's really pretty up here, and you guys need a bigger marina. That message keeps coming back from the rich
Doing that
people.
for 30 years.
Yeah.
Can't get the citizens
So
to.
if that's the way to grow the marina, is to improve it, expand it. And get a longer, nicer season.
Guarantee that?
Yeah.
Let's work on that,
Yeah.
I don't know, the Gulf of Mexico's not looking so hot right now.
Yeah.
Jeez, Louise,
No.
I tell you.
Can feel it up here.
Well, I think once again, Dave, you and your staff have done a great job, working through some really challenging times.
Thank you.
Making quick, I'm not, sure, don't know if it's really quick, but making the adjustments that you needed to make
Yeah.
to really make things work down there, and, I think it's reflected here. I'm optimistic too, that maybe we're through the worst of this, and maybe by next year, we've settled into a more predictable pattern, but, we don't know. I'll be optimistic about that. Mike, maybe a question for you. Last year, we kind of shifted how we dealt with the revenues from the park, and, took them a little more, well, we weren't so conservative in terms of how we
Yeah.
adjusted for those. How does that seem to be working? It seems to me that might have been a fruitful exercise, and that even with all the difficulties we've had, we probably are going to be pretty close to where we had budgeted.
Yeah, I think so. We were 2 weeks away from that being a terrible idea, right?
Yeah.
If we lose half of July, then it's a disaster for us. That just goes back to my earlier points about what happens if we don't meet our money next year. We look to the capital amounts that are in the budget, and we just don't fund them. And thinking that what's happening here with COVID is not a structural change, not a long-term adjustment for us, but rather a short-term. Even if it's an entire season or a season and a half, it's still something that I think it's okay for us to look 10 years down the road and say, for most of those 10 years, we'll be operating business as usual. So that was a structural shift in how we're looking at these revenues. We have some strategies in place to absorb a temporary hit to those, and we're probably not going to have to use them in the rec park this year. So yeah, I'd say it worked out.
So I'm trying to understand, Dave's sheet says it's a park marina revenue. The one given to us by Kim is through July. Park space rental daily weekly on Kim's sheet is $634,758. When I total Dave's, it's $586,295 for the two departments. That's 48,000 difference roughly right there. So
This is just, I'm sorry, are you looking at the month? Just the month of July?
no. So on the back of the spreadsheet
Oh, like a
that Kim
running
gave
total.
us, it shows the park space rental daily weekly under the July 2020 year-to-date amount
Yeah,
is $634,758.11. When I add up what you're saying is park and marina for 2020 through July, I come up with $586,295. That's less than what we're even getting on the official sheet for park spaces, not including marina or anything else, monthlies. So somewhere we have a large gap here.
yeah, I'm not sure why I've taken these numbers, these 2020 numbers, right off of the sheets I get from Kim. Like that shows like what we took in. So, the first thing I'm noticing is the July sheet from Kim, that's like, has all the July numbers in it.
Yep.
Is showing park space daily at 414 year to date, not 634.
How much of August is in this current handout?
In the revenues, it's still just July.
We're not
Shouldn't be
matching up.
any August.
And then, let me look at another sheet that I got from Kim as a budget sheet. It was printed on the 18th, and it's at that 414 figure still. Maybe that's a 2019 number, the 630. Because the sheet I got last week on the budget, like 818 printing,
Oh, let me see.
is not 630.
Yep, I'm seeing, maybe I was in the wrong year when I printed all of these. I think that's what's going on here.
Let's take
That's
5.
the wrong one. I'm gonna go print them.
Okay,
So the stuff that was emailed to you earlier has the right
Yeah, I
numbers in
printed
it.
that out.
when was it emailed?
Last week?
On the 18th.
Okay.
Good eye, Kelly. I too was thrown by these 19
This is what I do
numbers.
every day.
Yeah, I didn't trust this 19 sheet either.
I'm going, this isn't working.
Yeah, that feels like it includes August, you know, for that much more.
I think it,
200,000.
it's year-to-date as of this day last year. So it
Yeah.
includes most of August
Yeah,
last year.
because
Because
that's,
then you add September and we're gonna get to that 1.2.
yeah. Well, is there any talk on the expense side that we need to address? You know, we normally sort of go down line by line, look at our expenses. I don't know if anyone has questions
I'm
there.
more curious what you have planned for projects for next year where money would be,
Sure.
I don't know if you have anything capital or what, you know,
Well,
what are
there's-
some of the things you're wanting to spend money on?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. There's a couple of bigger capital, you know, Highway 61 associated projects that we're already looking at this year, even for the community connection over by the North House where the little timber frame bridge, you know, meets the bike trail sidewalk. There's a landing plan there that's, I understand, like in the 6 figures budget. Haven't seen the final detailed designs or hasn't been bid.
That's not
So-
coming out of park budget though, is it? For-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then a new entrance sign, I think at a much smaller scale, you know, under like a 5-figure budget.
Okay.
And then Bathhouse 3, our tired old bathhouse right in the middle of the park, that's like south of the rec hall.
Yep.
It like desperately needs to be redone, rebuilt.
So is that planned to be done then? Are we looking for bids and stuff already?
No, I started to get the design going with LHB, and then everything was on pause. So no, it's nowhere near planned or bid or budgeted. It's part of that capital savings fund that I think we're up to $600,000 or $800,000 that we're paying, you know, $160,000, $140,000 every year.
I think a bathhouse is more important than a landing.
Yeah, 150. And, you know, there's the boat launch project that's funded with state bonding money, but whether or not we do any sort of side work there with, I think you know, there's opportunity to reshape the corner where group camping is now across from the pavilion. That, you know, is currently just group space, not returning a lot of revenue at all. Very prime corner, easy access corner. We could add like 6 or 8 RV sites there. You know, that's
Right outside all those lines though, right? Or the cage?
yeah, that'll all go away. The old substation fencing and all that, yeah, right in that corner.
That's going away this next?
As part of the boat launch, yeah.
Okay. Is the building garage going as well then?
Yep.
Is that the plan?
Yeah, I think we probably would have already had it gone if COVID hadn't showed up.
Yeah, we need that gone sooner than later, as in a year from I would say next spring. The DNR and their boat launch project is still full steam ahead. They're working on final construction documents. That should be done this fall. They want to bid it this fall and start moving in some of the heavy rock this winter with a spring construction. Next spring into the summer, that point will be redeveloped.
And we have no bathrooms planned for that area, are there?
No, I believe there's a vault toilet in the DNR's plan.
Sounds right.
There's no sewer down there.
Yeah.
With the bathhouse project, if you're gonna be trying to do that next year, would you be waiting till the tail end of the season, or would you try to,
That's a tough one, Tim, I know. It's gotta be done on the shoulders or in the off-season.
yeah?
Timing, I don't think we could get it together to do it in the spring.
Mhm.
So it might have to wait another camping season, which is fine. The existing facility is adequate. We've kept it
Yeah.
up. It's not falling down by any
Because you
means.
basically have to shut that down and demolish that and
Yeah.
start from scratch, so you wouldn't have a bathhouse in that location if you, so
That's right.
ideally, it would be at tail end of the season or before the season started,
Tail end,
yeah.
as,
Give
I
you
know
time to work through-
timelines,
work through the
construction
winter.
timelines, yeah, they run long.
Is there a plan, I know it's a limited space area, is there any plan to make it any bit bigger? I think you can kind of go to the north, almost
yeah.
towards the rec park,
Yeah,
or
there's,
the building, I mean.
there is space there. There's a clothesline, little stockade that could add another couple thousand square feet even, which is what's needed.
Yeah,
Because it serves that overnight neighborhood of
Yeah.
tenters and much more use.
So what's the likelihood that you would still get that project together for next fall?
50/50?
Okay.
I would push for it.
Yeah,
That's my top priority. I mean, the connection and the highway is a bit more in your realm, or with Mike and CJ and the designers on the connection corner. At least I haven't had much action there.
mhm.
So I'm anxious to get that bathhouse planned and bid.
So what is it gonna take to move that discussion or, work with LHB along?
Squeaky wheel type of stuff, just, reaching out to them, getting back with them.
Mhm.
I know you guys have been busy with them on the City Hall project, and maybe we shift their focus if that is on pause.
I think it would be good to get that moving as much as we can. Like I said, we aren't lacking any people using the park because the corner is not prettied up in a big sign. That
Right.
doesn't seem to be an issue.
Right.
Like you said, I know there's a landing space, I've seen it. But certainly, this is of use to our
Yeah,
people who pay, the landing, not so much, the signage, not so much. This is really critical to the operation of the park, so I think that should be priority number one.
I think Park Board hears you, or we have that same list of priorities, and the bathhouse is up top.
I don't know, Craig, you sit on the park board, I don't know if I'm making sense or you know something different that I,
No, I think it takes time to put that together, so I mean, if you want to start building, if you want to be able to use it that summer we build it, then you either got to start in the spring or, I don't like pushing things into the fall because we always run into problems sometimes,
Mm.
Getting a late start, then it's winter, and then we're working on something. Be nice to start in the spring.
Tricky part about starting in the spring is it's when our season starts.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, we don't get to start early.
and when does winter disappear?
Yeah.
Right.
You don't know when it leaves
but at
and you don't
least-
know when it comes.
It's almost
Moving
better to think
target.
about starting late, taking whatever precautions we need to make sure we can do concrete work
Right.
Yeah.
late in the season.
Right.
And then
Yes.
being enclosed and doing the inside
Yeah.
stuff during the winter.
Getting it enclosed and getting heat in it, then the guy can work on it, you're right. And
Yeah.
then September,
Oh, good.
yeah, no, that's fine.
Couple of things. First, about the bathhouse, talking about the bathhouse. I agree with Kelly. I think that's pretty high priority to make sure that the level of service stays high. down there. First question, our building capital reserve account, like, we solid there? I mean, it seems like we're funding that a fair amount every year. So, it seems like.
I don't know the exact figure. Kim would, but
Yeah.
I'm guessing it's $750 million.
Okay,
It's in that ballpark.
that's kind of what I assumed. I remember
It
looking
was
at those
seeded.
numbers.
You know, we created it 2 or 3 years ago with about a $500,000 seed. And then, yeah, we've been paying in 150, 160 every year.
Yep. And haven't really taken much out apart from redoing the office, right?
Oh, thanks, Kim.
You know, that might have been done before it was created.
Oh, okay. So
That has been,
that was question number one.
you know, we've done little $10,000 projects, you know, power upgrades and paving and that sort of necessary capital.
Right.
Has been drawing from it, but they're just, you know, smaller, 20, 25,000, I think is the most we've spent in the last couple of years on power upgrades.
So
And
that's
those are
question.
gonna continue.
Question number one. So that's good to hear that the fund is healthy for a project like that. And the second question then would be, from building the previous one, the one down by the softball diamond, are there any lessons to be learned about the scheduling of that and how that went, so that when we start the process of, and this is all park board stuff too, so I mean, not to micromanage the park board, but are there lessons to be learned from that process so that the new one can go more smoothly, and that we can anticipate some of the problems that may have come up during that process? Because I know that project ended up being pretty expensive.
You know, it's just before my time, Jay, you're right. I just started in '06.
Okay.
I think that bathhouse opened in '04 or '05.
Seriously?
Yep,
Yep.
I know.
It's not the new
Just a couple
bathhouse
years
anymore, it's
New
15 years
bathhouse,
old.
That's
And
incredible.
yeah, I came in under this dark cloud of, you know, whoa, it cost $500,000, we thought it was only gonna be 200. I remember the sort of
Oh.
change of attitude towards that bathhouse and its expense. And it really, at the end of the day, it was just the real cost of building a bathhouse is what we come to learn. It's like,
Right.
they're very expensive. The one, you know, was it Two Harbors, put in a little bathhouse there
By the highway there.
by the highway, was $1 million.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was pretty expensive per square foot.
So if there's
Wow.
one thing that we've come to learn, it's, you know, expect to pay a lot.
Okay.
And it's worth it if it's durable, and this, you know, has stood the test. The bathhouse is in good shape for 15 years old. We still call it the new bathhouse.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that due to all the concrete with them? A large amount of the,
I think in the design of it, we should look in the future, like, if we ever have a situation like we have now, we want something that's easy to clean.
Yes.
You want a lot of stainless steel.
Yes,
You want wipeable surfaces, or hose-down surfaces,
yes,
stuff like that. I think
that's right. That's the lesson.
That's
we learned.
looking to the future on.
Well ventilated, over
Well-ventilated.
ventilated.
Right. Yep.
Right, stuff like that.
Yeah,
would be
solar hot
key.
water.
solar,
Yeah, if you can help aid in heating the water somehow, I mean,
I think there's where LHB will lend their expertise,
yeah.
Cool.
but it'll be costly.
So are we expecting over $1 million for this one? I mean,
We were a couple years ago when we
Two-
first started throwing numbers on the wall, and I was just, oh, it's outrageous. It's like $1,000 a square foot, you know. But it's the utilities, it's the tile, it's the, you think in your home, your bathhouse, your bathroom is the
Bathrooms and kitchens are expensive.
expensive.
Well, and we know that any type of bidding on jobs like this always come in higher than we anticipate. And, you know, I mean, our area just seems to be hit particularly hard, and I'm wondering if there's any ways around that, if we could have conversations with LHB. And I know at one time there were some programs out there when they were talking about like municipal buildings and things like that, where, you know, you could get a developer to come in and build and do the project and do some kind of an arrangement to sell back or lease back or something or other completed facility, which avoided going through the public bidding process, and, you know, you could work more closely with developers to negotiate on construction. And I don't know if there's any of those programs out there, or if there's any ability to do that kind of thing in a way that would benefit the city, because it just seems like the bidding process turns out to be an anti-bidding process. It's people that don't want to work up here, but yet they'll work for, 50% more.
Right.
And the same thing in Duluth.
Well, and how much locally, are there, obviously some things cannot be done locally, but what locally do we have people here that can do some of the pieces and parts?
That
The
doesn't
electric, the
necessarily
plumbing.
Make it cheaper though.
No,
Think
it wouldn't
about
be cheaper.
the bus garage that the school built, or, I mean, we've had local contractors that have been low bidders.
They've
And
all-
still, it can be more expensive just to work here for all the reasons that we know that it is. Tim, we'll look into options like that. Keep in mind, our last successful building project, the Public Works Garage, was the opposite experience
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah,
Such a
good.
shock. It
Yeah.
came in at a lower number than we expected. And I wouldn't say that's likely to happen again, but I think we did find that working with construction manager with a guaranteed maximum price was a good strategy for us. Particularly that construction manager, McGough, did a very good job for us, and so I would think that that's the road we would look at for the bathhouse again, is LHB would be our designer, but we'd turn to McGough and ask them to build it for us.
Yeah, I would hope we would use whatever means we have to try to keep that cost down, and not just open it up for competitive bids and be subject to the whims of the market at the time, and which we are, but,
It's a frustrating process, but I can't think of a better way for us to offer all the protections that bidding does to the public with their money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough to come up with a strategy that balances all those needs better, and it just ends up being frustrating, but it was designed to work the way it does, and I think it still is the way that we guarantee how, that things are done above board and well, and we did bid everything at the Public Works Garage. McGough went out and did all those different features and still got the low bidder, but we also had their additional protections of their expertise to make sure that the contractors were qualified, that they had some experience knowing that they would do a good job, and then for the rare one or two subs that they had any issue with, they had the resources to deal with that. So that's where, when we didn't have that piece in place, the construction manager, we would really struggle with how do you deal with a sub that's not doing their job. Is the general contractor going to worry about it, or is there just going to be extra costs passed on to us? And so I'd
Well,
like to think
maybe
that'll
that-
help, but still, we have recent experience in nearby markets that tells us what we should expect to pay
Sure.
for a bathhouse.
well, maybe the next time you talk to Bruce Kimmel or one of the folks from Ellers, just kind of throw that out there, if there's any other, creative programs that would allow us to,
Yeah.
to work,
Yeah,
to
well,
keep those
I'll-
prices a little bit lower.
I'll ask him. He'll be coming back to you, of course, to talk about the assisted living at some point this fall, and we can have him address that issue as well.
So for that, on this topic though, so the park budget, so we're still looking at coming in under what we had budgeted, but not as bad as what we, for 2020, I'm saying, not as bad as what it could have been, which is encouraging. And I'm gathering from the conversation here that the council is still in favor of moving forward with capital projects if possible in 2021, such as the bathhouse, expecting that there will be a rebound for park revenues in 2021, assuming that there won't be a closure at the beginning of the year, that sort of thing. Does that seem like a fair summary? Okay, so the budget that you proposed for 2021 is I mean, it seemed to me to be a pretty modest increase over the 2020 budget. Is there anything that you want to mention about about that strategy or that budget, or is it,
It's a good draft. We always have the luxury of time, well, perhaps you don't with your preliminary levy setting, but as the season continues, we'll continue to look at the September, October numbers, and, by October, you'll really know where you stand. But I'm very comfortable with next year's budget.
okay.
So far in here in expense, and I don't know that you can answer it, Dave, it might be a Mike. We have not paid the county yet for, I guess we haven't redone our agreement either really, but it shows that we haven't made a payment yet for the
That's
county
right.
building.
Brady
Okay.
doesn't bill until the end of the year, so oftentimes we're paying it in the next year.
Oh,
So then it's accounts payable, it gets moved back
journal
at the
entry.
end.
Yeah,
So
and that's,
we paid
I
last year the
include that on my
110.
year-to-date expenses
Mhm.
for the 2019 versus 20.
Yep,
The 408 includes the 131 that is due to the county,
okay,
even though it hasn't been taken out of our budget yet.
okay.
Okay.
And that comes out of your budget, huh? I guess because the pool used to be down there?
Yeah, wasn't my idea.
It's the easiest budget he's got. He has to pay zero attention to
Dave's
it.
going, give it back.
And I guess the 130 is better than 250, so I'm not
Yeah, you should
complaining.
feel good about that.
I'm not
Yeah.
complaining.
250 was,
Suggest some other department might wanna take that on.
it was a lot more than 250 by the time we were done with it.
Yeah.
You could throw it, I suppose, at PUC water, because we don't use the water anymore.
There's no,
Yeah, they
No
have deep
electric, no
pockets.
water. No sewer.
Good point.
We actually pay smaller bills, unfortunately. The,
that's probably way more than, less than utility bill was.
Any other questions or comments on the park?
Thank you guys for all your hard work,
You're
Dave.
welcome, Kelly.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yep.
We do it for the
Crazy.
people.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely some lemonade this year.
We do it for the guests.
I expect they'll keep coming if people are rediscovering how fun it can be, and I hear that even camper RV sales have just skyrocketed
Oh,
this
yeah.
year, obviously.
You can't find them anywhere.
I
Yeah.
don't imagine people are gonna turn around, unless they really disliked it, I don't see them turning around and selling them and giving it up after 1 year.
Right.
Give them 3, 4, 5 years, and then the used markets are gonna
Yeah,
be
they're-
great.
The kids won't be 6 and 7 anymore, they'll be
Exactly.
teenagers with all their own activities, and, yeah.
All right, so you guys want to move along? Mike, do you have anything else for the park? Kim, Kim? We can move
sure
on.
don't.
All
If it's
right,
all right, I'll
Gulp.
sit in with this discussion as well.
Please
Yeah.
do.
Hi, Paul. Good.
Thank you.
All right, man, jump in, lay it on us.
Get one look at that, please. Understand?
They're all the same.
They just have,
Okay.
oh, okay, gotcha.
This is good. All right, thanks
Um,
very much. Yeah.
Well, things are going well at the course. We started out with we came out of the winter good. Everything turned out to be in good shape and progressed from there. We've got some new equipment that we acquired over the off-season, some fairway mowers, and those have been really putting a good presentation on our product. And overall, our numbers are up, plays up. We're getting things that people we haven't seen before are coming through. We're getting good exposure. Some things are down as far as inside sales sort of things, some of our soft goods because the clubhouse is closed. But in general, operations are going smoothly. I'd say, we seem to be up about 10 to 12%. Everything's pretty positive. The only thing that we're struggling with right now is the golf carts. We've got we had 16. We started out with like 16 operational carts. We had 3 go down last week. We've got out of the 16, 8 of them are electric, and those are the the newest ones we have, those are like around 2008s, and they're in, physically they're in fairly good shape, but the other ones are, you know, 20 plus years old, and they're just wearing out. So that's kind of been we've been kind of getting by to this point, and we're still trying to keep things running, but like I say, we've got 3 that went down now, and I don't know that we'll be able to get those in operation this year. Other than that, you know, I think everything's been good. We had operations has been a little bit different with the clubhouse closed. We've just been through the door operations, credit card and check basically only, and that's been working well. Our bathroom situation is that if someone has to use the restroom, they have to come around to the back one at a time and come in, and then everything's sterilized after that. Same thing with the golf carts. We're sterilizing those after each use. And then we just placed an outhouse, or a satellite, I guess you'd call it, out by the 4th green area. And that services someone playing the 9-hole course. That'll service them twice, coming through 4 and then after coming through 8. So I guess that's, in general, things are going well. We I think as far as acquisitions we're looking for an update for our sprayer. It's a key piece of equipment that we have, and so we're looking for something. I think that's coming in our budget, that we're okay to look for something like that. The other piece that I talked about too is we need a debris blower, which is you know, something that's more applicable to golf courses than just like a backpack blower. So this is something that you just tow around with a golf cart, and it's a very strong blower. So we're able to keep you know, fairways, greens, and tees cleaned off. You know, during the transition times, and in different times too. Right now we've got you know, just anytime you have debris and you have to clean them off before you mow the greens and stuff like that. And that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I see that you have an increase in the capital outlay equipment portion of the budget. Is that something you're anticipating continuing on into the future? What's?
Yeah, there's I think that again, there's a lot of antiquated equipment there, and we're able to keep it functional, but I think it's going to be definitely beneficial to try to update some of this stuff. Like, to me, the proof in the pudding is when we got these fairway mowers. Our program is great, and the place looks like straight pajamas out there. It really looks good, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And
So where does that 14 come from?
the
I've got to print this one on a big sheet because, you know, there's
Otherwise-
a lot of small numbers on it still.
Hurts your eyes.
You can see just in terms of like count that golf has about 1/3 of our entire fleet, like from every department in terms of rolling stock. And the 14 number is based on each of those items having a replacement price and a number of years that we plan on keeping it, that comes up with an annualized cost. And so this 14 includes a fleet of 18 carts that we keep for 25 years that cost $4,000 each. So those are not new, those are a few years old. We may be able to get them cheaper than $4,000. We may not. We may be able to keep them 25 years. We may not. But at least it starts to put into the long-term budgeting that we intend to have a fleet of carts that are 18 and
that we'll buy a couple every once in a while when the opportunity arises. It also includes all the other pieces of equipment that Paul's indicated to us he needs to operate his maintenance side of things. So this is a real number now. It'll be in there forever, you know, or it'll go up, of course, as prices go up. And it'll change only when Paul says, instead of that piece of equipment, I need something different, or we're going to change the way we do something. I feel good about that number. The other pieces of the capital budget, we talked about when we sat down and had a real kind of deep conversation about the future of the golf course as a group, and we're not there yet. So we don't have built into this budget a realistic long-term capital number for the clubhouse yet, or for the maintenance sheds, or for the irrigation system, or for the reconstruction of holes as necessary. I think there's a lot more work that yet needs to be done, and it's our intention to keep building those things into the budget on a kind of a slow, gradual basis. We're going to get there, but we're not there yet. So we still have a budget where we're doing better revenue-wise, but we're planning on losing $65,000 to $75,000 this year, and it's, you know, because of COVID in particular, it's hard to think about some of the more creative strategies that we had about making money, and I don't think that we've got a realistic idea of what this golf course can do in the condition that Paul's been able to get it to. So it's probably going to be a few more years yet before we really know what does this look like on a long-term basis. But that number we know.
So the 14,000 is pretty well set by this, but, you know, the construction budget, that's to be determined as we go
Yeah.
forward. I mean, because obviously we don't have a history spending a lot of money for construction.
We don't, and that's something that has put us in a spot where it's going to be difficult to imagine doing any. And I think, you know, it's not that that's inappropriate. This has never been a course where we've wanted to invest in a fancy clubhouse. That clubhouse wasn't a huge investment when it was originally installed. It's not a course that has an elaborate irrigation system that touches every piece of turf that we want potentially watered. You know, we just have to know it is what it is. On the other hand, whereas in the park, we've got a solid capital budget, and we've established a savings account to pay for some of those projects. There's never been a source of revenue that we've set aside to pay for capital projects in the golf course. And there isn't a pot of money waiting to renovate or reconstruct things as they need to happen. So when we do need to fix things, or when we do need to replace things, now it's going to have to be on a shoestring and creatively, or we're going to have to borrow from some other source.
So are we planning them to buy carts for next year to try to?
Well, yeah, we're looking at the kind of the parameters, and kind of what we decided on was that in a rough illustration, these carts might last for 15 to 20 years. And so the idea is to kind of be rolling them through the, you know, in that time frame. Yeah, that's really the options you have. You know, you can purchase. I've been finding from the best opportunities come from the manufacturer's representatives, and because they deal with courses and they deal with fleets. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, there's a fleet of ones that they had out on a 1-year lease that still have warranty on them, and things like that, and those are for $4,000. Now, if I was to go out and shop with one of the local salespeople selling used things, their carts like that, they probably get $5,500 for, you know. There's also other opportunities too. I mean, you can lease carts for somewhere around $500 a cart per season. So, you know,
I'm just wondering, and I know we're municipal, I'm not sure, but would there be any businesses that might be willing to sponsor purchasing a cart with, say, Marathon wants to buy a cart, purchase it for the course, but then in return, on the side of it, there's a sticker, there's a magnetic whatever, that has their logo or something, so we're somewhat advertising for that business. Is that something that can be done, being that we're public?
I think so. I don't know whether that's a source of a lot of revenue. I think, we can certainly accept donations.
Well,
and-
I can think of several business owners that do go golf there, belong to men's league, that might be, I mean, even if we got, one or two carts out of it, that's more than nothing, but I'm wondering, I can think of a couple businesses that might be willing potentially, even if they made the payment over, if we bought them offhand, but they made the payment over the course of even 4 years or something to us, but, I mean, we could make up those parameters as to how we feel comfortable, but I can think of businesses that might be willing to do that.
In talking to other club superintendents and things like that too, another thing a lot of these places do is they've got additional cart buildings, and then members will buy their own carts and keep them in there for a fee.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have like their fleet of carts too, and then they just rent those out to the daily traffic, and it seems to work out, It's interesting. When I think about that, I think, well, you'd have to have more play than what we're experiencing now, but we are getting a lot of, the members run those carts quite a bit.
Yeah.
And they have a season pass on those as well.
Right.
And so, if they own their own carts, then their carts last longer. They can use them anytime they want. They have that thing going. And then our carts are basically not used as much,
Mhm.
It would last longer in a way.
I think we have to, and you've done, my golf course is in beautiful shape, I'm hearing good things. We awoke a sleeping bear the other morning on the 9th hole to change our course of walk. So I didn't stop and talk to him about rentals for sleeping there, and I probably should have. I just think we have to think outside the box. We didn't even have Canadian business this summer. I can't imagine what it would have been like had we been able to have them come down at some point.
Yeah, I wonder about that too. I think, the next thing I'm gonna have to try to figure out is something about marketing to see what we can do to just increase our rounds. Like I say, I've been really pleased with the flow, and I mean, it just seems way different than last year. The numbers, to me, don't really reflect how much different the course seems, but it's really positive that way. And
Well, I'm hearing lots of positive remarks, Paul, that people haven't seen it look like this in a really long time, so I don't know what other people are hearing at all, but
yeah,
I
well,
just,
our crew right
hats
now
off
is
to you and
really,
thank you.
really doing a great job, yeah.
Well, I know you're there early, like I said, I'm there walking at 5:30, 5:45 in the morning, and you're already out mowing already, so
Yeah.
it's beautiful to walk around, just on the road even. It's really
Yes.
gorgeous.
It's looking good.
But if we can add carts somehow or think outside the box, how we, do some of those things so your capital money can get spent on a few other things, like I said, even if it's adding a couple a year, when one person starts it, usually a few others will follow.
Well,
type thing.
yeah, that's great, and so that's kind of the challenge now, because the carts are, part of our revenue, and our revenues, is the challenge here, and
Yeah, and I see that number's really down so far this year,
Card rental.
cart rental.
well, I think it might be part of the entry thing. We have one of our tabs on daily rounds includes the cards, so
Okay,
it could be that maybe a third of the daily rounds should be in carts.
folds into that. Yeah, and I'm thrilled with what's happening up there. I just think it looks really good, and I think as the border starts to open up and you can
Yep.
market to a Canadian business and
Yeah.
eventually maybe possibly have a tournament or something that I know you've
We have a
talked.
tournament coming up on the 12th for the disabled vets.
September,
or yeah, on the 12th.
Okay.
Mhm.
I think that's really great exposure.
I think, yeah, we feel the same way. This, in terms of what we expected Paul to do for us was focus on condition of the course first,
Mhm.
and he's just knocked that out of the park.
Yeah,
So now it's going to be, you know, it takes a long time for us to kind of let that grow into what can this do as a business operation now. And particularly with COVID, we just don't have any idea. And we're excited to find out. This course is in great shape. As the word spreads about that, what's that going to look like to us in terms of a business operation?
Yeah, I think in my opinion from, to try to keep gaining on the PR of the people coming through, that they're happy with the conditions of the course, and then of course the carts are the issues. So, and I know what a situation that is for us, but that's probably like if I was able to correct that like I can turf, that's what I would want to do. We don't, like, we had a rear end go out on one of our favorite carts, and we had that in the shop, and well, what do you do with that? We got Twinkie can try to figure out, take it apart and see how it works and try to figure it out. It just doesn't seem efficient to rip into that old of equipment and try to rebuild it. We don't really have anything to take apart and try to exchange it. So that's kind of where we're at with these carts.
And we'll be looking at this incrementally. This is, a lot of like resort courses have a fleet that they just change out all at once, or they're on a lease operation, and I don't see us ever doing that.
Mhm.
That's just not the type of course we are.
right.
We know what we want to have, which is 18 carts that are operable and in different states of age, and that, we've got some pretty old carts that are still in great shape and very operable, so we know that we can do that. So I see us looking at the opportunities that Paul's talked about, working with the manufacturer reps and picking up a couple, 3, 4 here and there every once in a while is the strategy we're going to use. And especially right now, you can look and see in 2018 we spent quite a bit of money on equipment. In 2020 we've got quite a bit built in there. That we've made some investments in the fleet, and they've been investments to deal with maintenance and to try to keep the course in good shape. Those are investments that, even at this level, we're talking about buying used equipment and being really careful and smart with our money, but we have to do it if we want to have a course in good shape. When it comes to carts, I think we're going to be a little even more careful, because we don't really know if we have 18 or 20 beautiful carts, does that make a difference in revenue or not? Or does it just, meet a demand that's there? And I think we want to find out slowly and give ourselves time to figure that out.
Yeah, and I don't think by any means you need to have the best carts in the Northland. Like Paul's done a good job and talked about the used things and what we're buying. But again, if there's a way to acquire a couple more that's not coming out of the city's pocket, potentially, I just thought it's a good way to look at things and see, are there people out there willing to help us who use the course and say, hey, yeah, for a sign on a cart or whatever it may be.
Well, here's just a thought that's crossed my mind, and what about we've got 8 carts that are the electric carts that are newer. What if we took a look at taking 10, 12 rental carts for a season and renting those and seeing how that works for us? Those are going to be at $500. It's going to be maybe $5,000-$6,000. Cost to us on one cart is going to be $3,000 to $4,000. So
You mean to just gauge the usership, gauge the impact that having nicer carts has for the.
yeah, it'd be kind of a it's kind of like the COVID thing in a way, where we're taking our regular program and kind of staging it back, plugging this in and trying it out. And the reason it interests me is because there's other, most people that run golf courses are fairly conservative. I'm just thinking of some peers that do it that way and trying to see how that makes sense. And of course, it all comes down to numbers of people coming through, but it's
Well,
just,
numbers of people coming through, yes, how we can impact those numbers, and then also what's the impact on your staff as well, you know, like you're saying, is it a good use of your time to have Twinkie in there taking the rear end of a golf cart apart? Not really.
yeah, it's like the School of Hard Knocks. It's a very expensive school, you know.
Right.
Well, I think you've done really good things so far, so I don't see where that pattern will probably change much, so.
Right on.
That idea, I
Thank
like
you.
the idea of experimenting with something like that. However, I do believe that's a park board decision, right? I mean, like the decisions for, or maybe that's your decision.
Well, we're not
straight up.
making decisions about
Right.
stuff like
It's-
that today, we're just talking about the
We're talking
budget at a
about
higher
budget.
level.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just a concept to throw out there, and
So then, on that note, to close down, or to summarize the conversation for the golf course, it looks as if there's, you know, modest increase in the budget for 2021 that you're proposing. You're proposing an increase of 10 grand around for the revenues, for next year as well. So those things continue to show, an investment in the golf course, moving towards, you know, a different way of operating, or, you know, a more profitable way of operating. So, is there anything else that you have that you want to say, or any questions from the council about the numbers that are presented here then, about that sort of thing? Because, you know, the capital, yep, that's one. Actually, if you tally up the clubhouse construction and equipment, that's almost the same as the 2020 capital outlay for equipment. So I don't see any dramatic changes there. Anything else you can think of?
no, I think in general, our revenue will be up a little bit this year, but we're still, you know, battling the offsets, so, yeah, I think we're going in the right direction here.
Thanks, guys.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
We're staying kind of on schedule?
Not even close.
Not even close?
Okay, hopefully
Ben will be
I'll get
short.
you on schedule.
Yeah, like what time were you supposed to be here?
10.
Whoa. Okay, well, that's not terrible for us.
And this is actually better than it's been in the last year's few
Really?
years, so.
Boy.
Oh, I actually have one of these.
I don't
I
remember
brought
that.
my homework today.
Are these new ones?
Go for it, Ben.
Dive in.
As you can probably see, there's only minor changes. Kim actually does this because she knows all the inflation and looks at all these numbers way more than I do. We've got pretty much everything that we need to do our job. Obviously, we don't spend all of our budget all of the time. And we could go and buy all kinds of fancy toys and all kinds of stuff, but my feeling is why? For the reality of what we do and how often we have to do it, we're equipped for what we need to do, and we don't have any major outlay. We've got new trucks, new equipment. We've been looking for grants to replace some of that stuff that's coming to age. So, yeah.
And you've got the same problem we had in the rec park, that our new trucks are almost 10 years old now. And
Well,
it's like, wait a minute, what happened?
right.
But
Well,
thankfully, when it comes to fire equipment, that is still pretty good.
the 07 is getting to be where it needs to be. It should, if it were a paid department, they'd be looking at replacing it. But Lutzen just had one of their trucks refurbished, I guess you could call it. That brings it back up to NFPA specs and all of that kind of stuff with the fancy lighting and go through the pump and do all of that stuff. And that was, I want to say that was like 40 grand as opposed to $400,000 for a new truck.
Right.
So we'll probably, I don't know if we'll do that this budget year, but the next budget year we'll be in that. if we do end up doing it this year, I mean, we've got plenty in there to do stuff like that. We're still kind of looking at the DNR surplus stuff to replace that support truck that we have that,
That's Suburban?
no, that's a,
The 94 Ford
It's a 90
F-350.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha, okay.
yeah, that thing's got many issues. It's still workable, but it's not ideal. And then when the DNR has surplus stuff, it's fairly reasonable, and it would be built more for what we actually need a truck for. And the ladder's still usable, but that might be something that we might look at, but obviously we're not gonna spend $1 million on a brand new ladder truck. We'll try to find somebody's used truck somewhere for 20 grand to 40 grand or something like that. I've seen them out there that are newer and automatics and that kind of stuff.
Wait, is our ladder truck?
Our ladder truck's a 78.
Wow, that's amazing.
And
it's
it
a-
still
we bought
passed,
used.
it
It's
still
a-
passes pump testing and still.
It's a manual?
Oh, yeah.
That's
It's
amazing.
fun to drive, let me tell you.
I believe that.
We've only got a couple of guys on the department that can probably drive the thing anymore.
Wow.
So in the capital outlay, it says 43,000, but
Yeah.
that's a little different than what we're kind of tucking away for equipment. Is there something
We
planned?
this budget for fire is the hardest one we do because every one of those vehicles is 30 to 40 year timelines for replacing a new truck. And oftentimes, we even find some grant assistance to help pay for it. But there's a lot of equipment in the fire department that's not rolling stock that doesn't show up on this sheet. So they've got
Okay.
breathing equipment and they've got equipment to outfit the trucks with, and they've got ladders and hoses and other things that we have to replace on an ongoing basis.
Okay.
So that number at 43 is bumped up quite a bit from what's in this spreadsheet, just to make sure that we don't want to get caught short, because oftentimes, you got to make a new fire truck purchase, and like you said, it's going to be $300,000-$400,000 rather than 15. For those things the two vehicles that Ben talked about, we acquired both of them for a very reasonable price.
Right.
And if we're wrong on the lifespan of a 40-year-old ladder truck by a couple of years, it's not a huge item for the budget, but we've built into the budget enough to make sure that if we need to spend 25 to get a replacement instead of 15, that money's available. The way that the fire department is funded, there's a formula that we use that takes into account property values inside and outside of the city and the number of calls inside and outside of the city in their response territory, to divide up this expense budget between city taxpayers and those taxpayers that are outside of the city but inside of the expense or the response territory. So we want to make sure that this budget is everything, to make sure that all those folks are paying for it. Otherwise, it's the folks in the city that are subsidizing that response outside of the city. And usually, these past few years, it's been that the city side of it still ends up more like 60% of the budget, just because the number of calls in the city is higher by quite a bit. The property values are maybe closer in the response territory out and in.
And good news to the budget also is the Minnesota legislature passed another, I don't remember the number, but many millions of dollars for training reimbursements for fire training and stuff like that. I want to say we got close to $3,500 or better for training. So that helps a lot.
That's super cool.
Thank you for all you're doing.
How are your numbers for fighters right now?
For people or just
For
for?
people.
For people, we're down to about 18, I want to say now. I had a couple, we had Roger Hansen retire. And I've got one guy that I don't know where he is anymore. One of our new guys had some family stuff that happened with employment and whatnot, so he kind of stepped back for a little bit, I guess, here or something. And yeah, unfortunately, I don't have people knocking down the door. But we've still got a really good core group of guys that are showing up and getting the work done. And
CFO to move into town.
yeah, he's kind of a pain though. I was actually kind of proud of them. They took kind of the bull by their horns here this last meeting. Both Aaron and I were gone unexpectedly somewhat, and we didn't really get a chance to give them any chores or anything to do for their training meeting. So they actually went, and I had told them what we were going to do before, so they decided, well, we'll just go do that. So they went and grabbed the trucks and went down to the rec park and ran some water and played with trucks without either one of us there to poke and prod them. So I was surprised. A lot of times when we're not there, they go to the fire hall and just look around and, oh, Mom and Dad aren't here, we can go home now. So yeah, I'm really proud of these guys. They're really getting after it.
So you made a comment right at the beginning that you don't like to buy unnecessary equipment or big flashy things that if you don't need them. Are there any things though that you need to be able to do your job better that you currently don't have?
No,
Yeah, you feeling pretty good about?
I feel pretty good with what we've got. We've got all our air packs are working. They're all good. We've got our camera. We've got a 4-gas meter. We just got, I don't know how many thousand feet of fire hose that had just been hose tested from St. Paul Fire. Aaron's got a buddy that works down there, and they replaced all of their fire hose. So
Nice.
he brought a whole pallet of that stuff back. So
Cool.
that's a huge savings and deal for us because that stuff will last us for many, many moons.
Nice.
And then I think this year they're going to replace all of their 2-inch hose.
So then you can get
So
some
there
2-inch?
we get another pallet of that. So
Super.
we've been kind of lucky that way too, getting, because I mean that's thousands of dollars worth of equipment that we kind of just had fall in our laps. So
And I
So-
suppose after this spring's fire, if you guys didn't expose any weaknesses in your equipment or ability to respond dealing with something that size, then you probably won't.
yeah, what was it, 11 minutes or something like that? We were on scene and flowing water, and
Yeah, it was amazing.
that was crazy. So yeah, we didn't have any issues to come up there. One of the other, I mean, it's just like the creature comforts, I guess. If we were going to start spending kind of money. One of my guys said it would be nice to have a little better locker system at the fire hall, but he said that we could look for grants for that, and I mean that's not going to be $150,000 or anything for lockers. So yeah, for like the creature comforts, I guess we're just kind of look around and see how we can do it, cheap, without spending gobs of money for stuff that isn't necessary, I guess.
Does anybody have any other questions? Any other thoughts?
Thanks for everything, Ben.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Ben.
May have to recruit a little, huh?
Yeah.
A little bit of
Constantly.
advertising?
Yeah, we've been working at it throughout the whole county, because it's not just us that have that problem, and it's tough,
All the
because
departments are ahead of them.
young people don't want to do anything anymore, and then young families that move here, they're busy working the 5 jobs that it takes to live here, so.
Well, I was talking even with my kid, and his hard part is right now, for him, he goes to work at 6:30 in the morning, and in wintertime, it could be 5 in the morning till 7 at night. So,
Right. Yep, that's weird. I get a phone, you're gonna have a phone call or emails this, with the West End here, they've been talking, Schroeder, they have had a couple of calls during the week, during the day that nobody's around.
Nobody shows up.
Really?
Makes
So
it
then
tough.
they end up paging the next one, and then they end up paging Lutzen to come and do it, so it's like,
See here?
Thanks.
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's scary throughout the
Get a
whole.
mix of guys that are available.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
That's, yikes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. What you mean?
Thanks, Ben. Yeah.
Have a seat.
Your budget's a lot lighter than Lenny's though.
We've been waiting for you.
Poor Lenny.
There's pretty much not much change in mine anyway, so.
All right. We'll jump in, I guess, huh? So, what do we? Looks like we've got, again, pretty modest change in this one. Is there anything that stands out that you want to tell us about, or any projects that you've got that are on the?
No, nothing
The
out
forefront?
right now.
Looks like we don't have any capital expenses really for this. Well, I guess there's one on our meeting for tonight, but on the capital, what is it, the vehicle list? It's only one for next year is what it's looking like. New skid steer, which we've been planning for a number of years from what I understand.
And this keeps with 3 full-time employees then, Lenny?
Yep.
How do you see your need going into the future?
That's hard to say, depends on what once we get this trackless, that's certainly gonna make a big difference for our, for doing sidewalks and stuff, this upcoming, more miles of sidewalks, but, there may be some operating issues possibly we may need more operators, so.
Are you meeting your needs for summertime, the volumes and what you have going on and?
Yep, right now,
I'm assuming you're gonna have more snow removal as all of this completes and things happen, so.
yeah, that's the big issue right now, is snow removal, so.
Are you meeting your summer needs or,
Well, for this,
I'm just curious whether you think part-time, full-time,
yeah, I
I'm a
think we're
little
okay
worried
right
about
now.
this. Okay,
And this summer with no festivals going on, it's,
that's helped.
yeah.
Some of the things you might imagine Lenny's department using a part-timer for in the summer are things that we use parks part-timers for as well. So like cleaning bathrooms and emptying trash, and those are things that we do with both streets and park staff. I think that, we would look to, before we would think about adding another streets department person, we probably would look at adding more maintenance in the park side to do some more of that trash removal, bathroom cleaning, to try and relieve that pressure from Lenny and his staff so that we can keep them working on things that, their higher levels of skill and experience are more appropriate for. In terms of the wintertime, we have 2 competent operators in the Parks Department, 3 in the Water and Sewer Department, and 2 in the Electric Department that we do bring in from time to do snow plowing operations. And I think at least initially, we'll look at trying to use those resources to add another operator to the snowplow fleet for our new piece of equipment until we figure out how that shakes out. Particularly with Dave and Aaron in the park, their need for doing park-related things in the wintertime is quite a bit smaller, and so the disruption of having them come and operate a dozen times in the winter would be less. But we've also had our electric and water and sewer staff step in and do some operating for us of snowplow equipment. So I think we're ready to add resources there with the ones we've got right now until we learn more about what does this look like on a long-term basis. And then we may decide, well, we just need another person and we can revisit that as needed, but for this budget, we don't have that built in.
Okay.
So as we talk about, and I did my work session with Patrick the other day, you know, as we talk about how do we meet the needs of our citizens and what are some of the things that we wanted to work on, and we talked about views and right-of-ways and things, and one of my questions was, and it could hit Lenny's department, that's why I bring it up here, is like when you pull up to a stop sign and you can't see either direction, and I can think of many neighborhoods and areas in town, obviously your view is not clean. Is that up to us to clean up, or is it up to us to contact homeowners, have trees trimmed? How does that work?
All of the above.
Okay.
I mean, it's more about, at least from my perspective, what's the best strategy to use in terms of effectiveness and cost. And sometimes that is asking homeowners to do some work, and sometimes it's just going out with our own crews and dealing with it. I think the issue you're talking about with making sure stop signs are visible is something we'd likely just do with our own crews.
Well, and stop signs are typically visible. I can think of a lot of different places where I stop at the stop sign and there is no way, if I stay there, I'm gonna see the street either way to see what's coming. And I've thought, you know, because it's one of the things that we've talked about as we're talking about ordinances and everything else, and I think, okay, if we want to make some of these things changes, and hopefully we move them along. Obviously, we've been a little stalled with COVID, but who is that the responsibility of? If it becomes us, then is it his department that, you know, will be asked to do that? Do we have the means to do these things? So
They,
that was
I think, you know, periodically now are clearing brush and debris from sidewalks and view sheds and other things. So yeah, they would certainly be involved in that. I think a lot of the spots maybe you're talking about, we would need to have the homeowners involved as well, because it's generally something that they probably value a lot, which is the reason it's still there in the first place. Like it's a part of a hedgerow that they were counting on, or it's a tree that's their favorite, and so there's a lot of politics involved in that too. And I think as our programs get developed to respond to code enforcement and
So that might
things-
be adding to your staff to have people sending letters. and-
Well, and I think we're staffed up now to do it if we decide that's the project we want to work
Right.
on.
Right. Okay.
So,
Well, just all these initiatives that we have, it's like, okay, as we move through and do these, what does it mean
yeah.
for
I think
people in time?
The other, as we talk about just maintenance staffs in general, all of our maintenance staffs have some crossover here and there. And the most pressing need for adding maintenance staff is probably a line worker. And not that they have more line work that they want to get done, but just that we need to make sure that we keep filling that space in our staff so that we can have turnover. And it takes 4 or 5 years to train one from start to finish.
Yep.
And I could imagine us having an apprentice line worker added, and sometimes they're just going to be doing some other things like brush cutting, which is really a line function as well. And I could also imagine us adding some sort of a summertime kind of an upgrade from parks maintenance to more of a street operator, but a summer employee position, and thinking about that as a recruitment tool for us to look for somebody who might make a good full-time staff person someday. And so and that's what we're looking at now, and we'll probably look at the line worker first, and then if we do find that we're still needing more maintenance staff, then we may come back and ask for that kind of summertime help.
Okay.
This year in particular, I mean, I think we found, and every business is in the same place,
Right.
there just isn't any help to be had. So hopefully that'll change next year.
As long as the
Interesting.
agreements that we're talking about here, as long as those are working to accomplish the work that's necessary to be accomplished, to make sure that the city streets, sidewalks, etc. are clean and safe, then I think that's fine to continue operating that way. I do think it's good to be looking ahead to see what kind of planning we need to be thinking for and expecting for. So that's, especially with new equipment that might require specific training for operation.
Well, we'll be getting our feet wet this winter with the new piece of equipment before we actually have to start doing a lot extra with it, you know, so. That's the plan, and we'll see what we need for next year.
Will you use that new piece of equipment downtown too now, or will you still use the skid steer downtown?
Well, I think that, to start with, we're gonna try and just use that exclusively
Mhm.
until we determine what we actually need, you know.
Yeah. Give you a good opportunity to learn how to go around light poles and, yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be a little different operation, because it's a little longer, and it articulates in the middle rather than, like a skid steer can spin on a dime, you know.
Yeah.
But it's narrower.
But it's narrower, and that helps with our light poles, you know.
Yeah.
You know, with the DNR project and the dog pound issue, are we gonna have to step up and, I mean, we are gonna have to step up and do something, it seems, with regard to that. We don't see anything, I don't see anything in the budget that calls for us doing anything about
Replacing the dog pound.
replacing the dog
Yeah.
pound, you know.
I was just gonna ask about that.
No, I don't think that's like an annual budget sort of issue. The dog pound, as we've funded it, is pretty minimal in this budget, as you can see. We're not anticipating having to spend a lot of the upfront capital to build this thing, not the way it's been talked about. And as a new building, I'm not seeing a need for us to increase our maintenance budget on it either. So I think what our plan is, what this budget includes, is really the same models we've got before. There's a building that we'll be doing some minimal maintenance on, but that will be operated by others.
So there has been thought given to that whole idea that we're gonna need to do something, and that this is gonna be adequate to address the city's contribution or commitment to that.
I mean, on a structural, long-term operating basis, yes, this will be adequate. Will there be some one-time expenses associated with moving it? There could very well be. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I don't think we need to build that into the long-term budget. Because it's gonna happen once and then not
Right.
again.
Yeah, we do have potentially, hopefully, partners that would be assisting with those expenses as well, so. As far as a one-time expense, probably gonna be pretty nominal as well. We talked about equipment, we talked about staff. Not anticipating any changes in expenses for any of your equipment or anything like that. COVID hasn't made the expense of any of your consumables go through the roof or anything like that?
Not through the roof, just a few things, you know, just a few things we've had to build, and you know, garbage bags, or extra garbage bags, because most of our cans are just about air because pizza boxes and containers, you know. So we've
So
been going.
after a year's experience up at the Public Works facility, that's going well, everything's, no unanticipated expenses there that, I mean, I don't see anything here, but,
Nothing that I can think of right now, no.
A bit of a seesaw for the first couple of years because we didn't really know how
yeah.
to budget it, but seems like we're coming back down on it.
We see that 2018 year is still including a lot of startup costs.
Yeah.
Making
Right.
sure that we've
Right.
got it dialed in and has all the things we want in it. And now that it does, it's what we expect, which is it's a low maintenance facility and there's not a lot of things that need to get fixed because they're new. So it's performing as designed, which is nice. And I think we've probably got quite a few more years of that before we have to start thinking about significant investments again. And that's good because the budget for the buildings that it replaced was pretty small too.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there was not much maintenance going on there.
Is there any other questions on this for the streets department?
We do have 17,500 in there for the equipment budget for streets right now. That does not include the things that we're gonna talk about tonight. So that'll bump it up, you know, another $3,000. 3,000 or 4,000, depending upon what decisions we make tonight. That's kind of the level of changes we expect that'll still happen in the next couple of weeks before we have to bring back a preliminary levy proposal to you, so I just want to point that out.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments, snide remarks? I think we can probably move on then, no?
Thanks very much, Lenny.
Thanks, Lenny.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Is it our turn now? Or you guys' turn?
Yeah, it's always your turn, Jay.
Ah. This council number, just
shake it.
extravagantly expensive. Get rid of that. Oh, something went down.
Why don't we start with this council number?
So I have a question.
Okay.
Not like we're gonna get rich off of it, but how often or when was the last time it's changed?
I'm not sure.
Before I got on the council.
Certainly before I was here. I think in the 90s though that was changed.
They changed it right before I started, so
Late
it's
90s.
98, 99. They changed it from a, like, per meeting style to this amount per month.
Straight amount?
Yep, and it's never changed since then.
You can change it. You have to wait until after the next election for it to take effect. So this is the perfect timing to talk about that if you wanted to. And
Well, and I-
$6,000 a year for the mayor and $4,800 a year for city councilors is what the
Right.
salary is included in this.
Do we have any idea, cities our size, what they look like at all?
No, but we could certainly gather that information for you.
It would be pretty easy to gather. I seem to remember. I seem to remember there was a comment that went out over. There's like a mayor's listserv, and somebody threw that question out there and was like, "What on earth do small communities do about this?" And it was the answers were all over the board. So
That's
I mean,
what I
it
would
was.
expect.
It was that some small cities that were 1,200 people had, they paid $2,000 to their counselors, and the mayor got paid the same amount. And some of them, like, they actually expect the mayor to do more work, so then they get paid like 10 grand, and it just was like all over the place, and it really was not a super helpful link, but I'm sure we could parse out some information about what that.
And I'm not thinking anything huge, of course. This is not a full-time job. It's not a 40-hour, 20-hour-a-week job. But especially in light of COVID, I thought, there should be something, we almost should plan or have something that it's every so many years. And granted, another council could change it, but to just take a look at, because not changing it from the 90s is a really long time. And I think that all of us have put in a lot more this year, obviously, with COVID. I think we're going to have to put in more next year still if COVID's all over. We have a lot of work in the ground to make up for a bit. That I just was curious as to how that went, and my thought was even like a 5% bump, which obviously is not huge when you're talking $4,800 or $5,000 or $6,000 or whatever you said it was. But just something, a talking point. I don't know what others feel, or if we're too afraid of the public, what public thinks, and it should stay the same. I'm okay to have that discussion too. So,
Well, as somebody that's not running for election, I would say, I think it's probably overdue. That the council does a lot of work and it takes a lot of commitment. It shouldn't be an expectation that we're just coming to 2 meetings a month and that's all it takes. I mean, it's a lot more, there's a lot more to it than that. And, I think if we were going to consider something, I would like to see a larger jump to make up for the 20 years that, you know, I mean, not that you can make up for that, but the fact is that it's a tough subject for elected officials to talk about wanting to raise their own salaries, and probably easier for me now, knowing that it's not going to affect me, you know, in any way. So, I mean, I think about something along the lines, and again, I don't even know respectively where other communities might lie, but, you know, to raise council salaries from $4,800 up to like $6,000 or maybe even $7,000 a year annually, and mayors, you know, proportionally to that too. And think about this as and I think your idea is good, Kelly, to think about a 5-year review of that.
Yeah.
So that future councils wouldn't feel like they're just pulling this out of the air, but that there's been some thought to future future councils.
Is
So,
that
I mean,
something that you guys could gather for us? Like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking Ely maybe is similar, Cook is similar,
You know,
Babbitt,
it's not.
Silver,
They're
no?
definitely neither of those. Ely may be closer.
Different structures.
That's the trickiest part about this, is figuring out what are we similar to. And Marais has a disproportionately complex organization compared to similarly sized cities. And so we'll give you a variety of cities to look at, and
Okay.
then that can be part of your conversation, is which ones do we feel like we're comparable with.
Yeah, and how do they, you know, I don't know if they're willing to, but how do they look, or how often do they review, or is it just when somebody gets an idea? Because I do think that's something, we do it with employee salaries. I think that this is no different. We're employees of the city. We're elected officials. Obviously, I'm not looking to make a living here. But that's also a way to tell people, hey, we value what you're doing. Thank you for the time that you're putting in. And in return, we want to make it be something that's comparable to others. And I don't know, maybe we're way ahead of the game, or maybe we're way behind, but I just think that, you know, like I said, reviewing every so many years, and that's a discussion for all of us to what we feel comfortable with, but maybe other cities have something.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we review everything every year.
Yeah,
For every department.
yep,
It just seems kind of funny to me that this aspect of it hasn't been reviewed since the 90s.
well, I think
So, mean,
everybody gets so afraid,
Right,
you know,
I
and,
understand.
and
that,
I'm
but
sure it's not gonna be any
it's
different
public,
right now with
right.
COVID and everything else, but
But I
there's a
think-
lot of work that goes into this, so,
I think it should be looked at and, you know, given, you know, what's expected of people when you get involved,
yeah.
you know. I don't know, maybe on the right track.
I mean, it takes a lot of time to do the job well.
Right.
And
Yeah,
there's
I think-
been different folks that have spent different amounts of time on it over the course of it.
Right.
And yet, there's never a time where you're not that elected official, where somebody might not call you and have a comment,
Right.
or that you might not run into that in a story you're in. It's always on, so.
Yeah,
It adds a lot of stress to anybody's existence.
And that's part of I've never brought it up. I mean, I've talked with a couple of people around town about it here, there, and everywhere, just to, you know, they ask me how much time I put into this position, and I tell them it's like water. It takes whatever space it's given. You know, like if when there are big things happening, I put a ton of time into this, and when there's, you know, when it's more quiet, then there's not as much time that goes into it, but there's always opportunity for more.
yeah,
And like what Mike said, if you're doing a good job with this is part of your identity as a person, and that's I think that's important for people to have that. And I also trust that our community, if the council did feel like there was a disparity in the pay that needed to be addressed, that our community would hold the council accountable, you know, in whatever way that looks like. You know, saying like, hey, you're getting paid more. Let's make sure we get this stuff done, or saying, you know, what's going to change because of that? You know, what's going to change because of the change in pay? So those are some things that we need to keep in mind if we pursue doing this. I feel like you know, we've been really lucky to have the council that we have. You know, like you guys have been really fabulous to work with, and we've gotten a lot of stuff done, and we've had some really great conversations that I think are reflective of the community. And it makes me wonder, you know, if that additional incentive is going to increase the candidates, you know, for the council, what impact that would have. You know, I'm assuming probably positively, but it's, you know.
Yeah, I know, I don't think anybody gets into this for money,
Yeah.
obviously.
I hope not.
Because why are they disappointed?
Not doing well.
For me, you know, it's I don't know, I'm crazy, my husband and I talk about it. Helping others is a big thing, and I don't know that I want to say it's a calling, because sometimes I just go, oh, gee, I could help and do this, and I could do that for a little while, and then I keep saying that to a lot of things and get myself involved in a lot of different spots. But I think most of us that come into this are of that structure, that, hey, I see a need, I see a chance to help. Some people get into it for the wrong reasons, or say, well, I want this changed and this is going to happen, and then they discover that it doesn't exactly go how you think it would. And it's not only on this level, you know, it's commissioners, everything else, that you find out government doesn't just work the way you think that it should. And so, but those are the kind of people too that I'm happy that I think we're drawing in a bit, because they get to learn and they get to go back and talk to their friends who are probably of the same mind, and then go, hey, this is how this process works, and it's not just pounding my fist or stomping my feet. There's a lot more, or it's not just because he said or she said it has to be this way. It's really, so I'm glad for that, but I think people get into this for a lot of different reasons, and money is definitely not it. But anyway, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but if you guys can give us information, then that's something more we can talk about again.
Okay.
And yes, Jay, thank you for all that you do.
Thanks. I wouldn't do it if I didn't like
In
it.
the meantime, we've continued our 20-plus year trend of not changing this number in the slightest.
Yep, I
So,
noticed that.
moving on to we call it the city clerk's department. It's kind of the home of administrative city hall efforts, and includes a portion of Kim's salary and my salary and Hayden's salary. And Patrick's salary, and those salaries are also shared amongst many other departments, because of course the services that are provided at City Hall are services that sometimes we need to make sure other funds are paying their appropriate share of. There's not a lot of significant changes in this year's budget for that.
Do you have to like keep track of time then, sort of, as to how you divvy up where things get, I don't want to call it a time study, but.
We do,
Okay.
particularly for those employees who are paid by the hour. We keep that record, and their time is then coded to a particular one
Okay.
of these line items.
Okay.
And then we shift that apportioning every year.
Okay,
For those of us that are salaried, we just pick a percentage and we reason through it, and then every once in a while we go back and revisit it and make sure that that percentage still makes sense.
okay.
So, moving on to elections is an every other year expense. Maybe it needs to be more than 7,000 though.
Well, we decided to smooth that part of the budget to do 7,000 every year.
Yeah. But it's
And
only
the-
every other year that we spend it.
It's only every other year that we spend it. Otherwise, we have, 14,000 every other year, and it does this to the budget, so.
Yeah, and to the
we
levy
just
is
do
really the problem.
7
we don't wanna
every
levy
year.
14,000 for
We're
this
still
next
saving
year.
for it in that way.
Yeah. Next,
Is that money we pay to the county?
we do.
Yeah.
So the county runs the elections, even the local elections for the city. They send us a bill when they do an election. So if there's ever special elections, then those are additional expenses that we would end up paying.
So with all the changes to absentee balloting and that, could we expect that that's going to change that cost
That number?
for the county?
I don't think it'll change it a lot. I know that the county is going to receive some assistance for election costs this year. Some of it is supposed to come to us, but I'm sure we'll just give it to them anyway because we don't have election expenses that are different than theirs.
Okay.
No, I'm not seeing that, but maybe we'll learn something in November about what elections look like now. And,
Yeah,
I mean, this is more
I'll
about
learn something in November, yeah.
about printing costs, and I'm not sure that they've got significant election judge expenses that'll be different than in previous elections. And it's a pretty small item for our budget anyway.
Yep.
The next thing, financial administration, is basically the share of the audit that we're portioning to the general fund. And a portion of that is sent to other funds to pay as well.
How much is an audit typically?
Twice
Total?
that amount. So this is half of it, so
That's half?
that's half.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, you know, it's a $10 million operation.
And the other half is paid by the utilities.
Do we ever put it out for bid? We haven't, have
We
we?
haven't for a long time.
We've talked about it. in
We
the
have
past
talked
years.
about it.
Yep. Because we're one of the criteria for the audit is the familiarity of the auditor with
Right.
the organization.
Yep.
And
Like that's a
always
pro and a
been-
con,
Yeah.
Right.
it turns
Yeah,
out.
For the pro is that it makes the
Yeah.
audit cheaper. The con is that
Yeah.
it makes the audit cheaper.
I was happy about it this year because we did it entirely distance. I was able to give the auditors access to our software and then upload all of our data so they could run all their own reports and see all transactions and then any checks and proofs. And then I scanned them in and sent them, and that way it was entirely distance this year.
yeah, I know they were as well. I'm just wondering if that's, I don't know, you guys have to deal with it. What are your thoughts? I know it's hard to switch sometimes, but for the sake of money, what are your,
I'm not
You know.
sure it'd be cheaper to go out. I mean, we could find out if you're interested in doing that. I think that particularly a couple of years ago, we had some questions about whether we were satisfied with the work they were doing in terms of the reporting side of it. But we've never had any issue with the work they're doing in terms of the auditing side of it. So, and that's the more important part in my mind, is that they're thorough and do a good job and provide that credibility to our financial reports. That there are other firms that are capable of that work.
Yeah, and the people inside of that firm have changed over the years too. And seems every year they're kind of given a new directive to look specifically at different things than the previous year to see how that's going on. So.
okay.
This would be the time if you want to open it up and just see.
I know, I'm not sure. I'm kind of 50-50.
Well, let's just leave that as an
Yeah.
open question. Next is the city attorney. This is a really variable number based on just what's going on. Chris and his firm have multiple attorneys that we work with on an annual basis that have some subject expertise. And the costs have been, in my opinion, very reasonable, and the results have been very good. So it's been, I'm not even sure how many years now, more than 10, I think, that
Probably.
we've been working with Flaherty Hood, and I'd recommend we keep working with them.
And you said this is expense through August, basically, with except tonight's stuff?
Yeah.
Wow, even with COVID, that's not, I would expect with COVID, we'd be,
Some of the COVID expenses, you know, the mask ordinance, all those things, I've moved into the CARES Act fund.
okay,
So they're not in that number.
okay.
Yeah. The other things that end up in this number are lawsuits, if we have any, and research on ordinances, and things that have happened this year that we've done.
Okay,
But just kind of the general also, their participation in your meetings and researching any materials and council packets beforehand, preparing contracts. And I just think they do a good job for us.
Yeah, I think the work that they've done, you know, I mean, compared to the system of having our own in-house attorney or contract attorney locally, I mean, we have far better service, familiarity with municipal issues, and
Yep.
ability to network with other municipalities too. And,
Yeah.
I mean, I tell you, the bang for the buck we get with
Absolutely.
Flaherty and Hood is, I
Yep.
mean,
I agree with that,
way,
Tim.
way beyond what we had experienced prior to them.
My favorite department is next, other general government. So this is the landing place for everything that doesn't have another home. Safety assistance program, the memberships that the city has in different organizations like Association of Small Cities or Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, things like that. But it also ends up being the place where we budget for one-time expenses or pass-through expenses. So you look at previous years and you see all kinds of, large chunks of money sometimes that are expensed here. And they often have either a corresponding revenue or they are something that it would fit into what we've called council priorities.
Which on this sheet is engineering fees.
Yeah. And that number is kind of sitting out there and waiting right now for what it's going to be. So it's not included on the spreadsheet, but I do have it included in my other levy calculating spreadsheet. Planning and zoning is a portion of my salary
And Patrick.
and Patrick's. And then there are also some occasional other costs that we build into there, but we've also done special codes, so like the housing study, for instance, we expensed in other general government. But you can see the line item HKGI housing study, so we know how much that was. We've got police administration here just because there isn't a department head that works on it. This is on a list of things, conversations that have started but really not finished. And that's not likely to change for this year. But I do expect next year to be able to make progress on these conversations again. The county will have an administrator in place. We'll know who's going to be on the city council and the county board for a couple of years. So I think we'll have a better stable position to go back to some of those difficult conversations. And a lot of prep work is done, but I'm not sure how much of it is going to be relevant anymore because the players have changed so many times now. So we'll have to wait and see. But so for now, what we know for sure is that number is not going to change in 2021. Other financing uses, you can see the library fund transfers. You've already approved that budget. That's our share of it. And then there's just a couple other little bits and pieces there. Our revenues, let's talk about a couple of these. Electric franchise fee, this is something that I've brought up in the past, and something that the PUC will end up talking about again during their budget. This is a 40,000 plus
1%.
1% of the gross of our electric, and that's what we charge the electric fund as a franchise fee. We call it a franchise fee. A lot of other places will call it something like payment in lieu of taxes, and it's a very common, probably every city that has an electric utility has some method like this that has the electric utility fund general fund expenses.
Can you say how you calculate that again, Mike, please?
40,000 plus 1% of the electric revenues.
Thank you.
And so that ends up being 2.5% of the electric revenues right now, something like that. And one of the things we learned when we looked at how bond rating agencies are evaluating electric utilities is that they have a percentage that they think is okay and a percentage that they think is too high, and 5, it seems like it's still okay. So this is something that has been on my list of potential ways we might change how we're looking at funding the general fund. And I think it's still there, particularly because the electric utility right now is working through a rate study, and They are considering a future with fairly minimal capital expenses and 2 fairly large debt payments that are going to go away in 2023. So they're extremely healthy financially, and this is something that, if it's appropriate, they can certainly afford and would be useful to us. Move down to local government aid. 63.8 is what is certified for us next year. That's a small bump from what we were at. Thank you, state of Minnesota. In 2001, we had $360,000 of local government aids. So, you know, got some work to do there.
It's still there, though. We're still getting something, which is...
They wanted to zero us out for a very long time, and so this is impossible work for the legislature to do, to figure out. They don't even agree on what local government aid is supposed to be for. But a lot of hard work's gone into this from the League of Minnesota Cities and other organizations, working with the legislature to try and keep it stabilized and remember its purpose and fund it, so we're appreciative of that. There's some rent revenue in here. The city hall rent revenue, the major component of that is the liquor store, I believe, paying rent revenue to us. So that's one of 2 ways that the liquor store contributes to the general fund. The other way is at the bottom of the page, $200,000 transfer that we just budget and take every year. Well, that's been not all of their profits for a long time now. So they've also been accumulating money in a fund balance above and beyond. That won't be the case in 2020. They're going to be eating into their own fund balance to afford to pay us the $200,000 transfer this year. And we don't know how much yet, but let's take a look at that for now, because
Are we gonna talk about the liquor store or what?
we're not going to talk about, we're going to talk about their revenues a little bit right now,
Yeah.
but we're not going to talk with Chris about his budget until a later time.
Okay.
So I'm gonna ask a quick question while he passes out on that electric franchise fee.
Yeah.
How or when would we have the discussion about changing that? Because you said there's room to potentially grow. Is that something we do at our next, like a budget session? Is that a recommendation that you make? Do we have to do anything with that?
You'll have to do something with it. I will make a recommendation on it. It's something that I just keep on the list of if we want to make any changes to this proposed budget, that we would look at
That's an
doing that.
area. Okay,
It's an ordinance that creates the franchise fee, so there will be council action required. It's something that the council gets to set, so the Utilities Commission doesn't really have to agree to it. But
Okay.
since we're all one organization, we're also looking at it from the side of what effect it'll have on the electric's actual budgets and operations.
yeah.
So that's nice that we get to look at it from both ways and make sure that it fits. Here is a little bit of a chart. So these numbers are, I'm pretty sure they include all the sales tax and the gross revenues right now, so they're not going to be the same as you're going to see in the monthly spreadsheets, because the sales tax won't show up in revenues for, we collect it in the till, but we don't actually collect the revenue. It goes straight to the state instead. So they're a little bit inflated in terms of their total amounts, but the idea is that we just want to measure what's the difference this year on a monthly basis versus previous years. And you can see January and February, we actually made more money in 2020 than we did in previous years. 15 to 20% more money. And then March came along and we started to get the effects of being actually closed, like the door was closed for a couple weeks. April, we hung in there, and I believe that has more to do with the fact that April's just not a very busy month for us, and it doesn't matter what's going on. But then you start to see what happened in May and June, and there are some real losses being taken here in the liquor store, that in terms of compared to years past.
Have we started to accept cash over there yet?
We do not accept cash over there yet. We're also not open on Sundays over there. And I think that, you know, when Chris comes and reports on his budget, that's a good time to kind of dig into all those questions you might have for him about the operations.
So I just think we need to change the way it's being operated. That's my opinion. There's some things that I get complaints all the time, and I don't like hearing complaints from the way we operate things. I think, you know, I think there's room to improve things. I mean, Sunday is a big thing, not taking cash. Our hours are short. I think we can expand our hours if we, I mean, I'm looking at some of these numbers here and, you know, I know in running my business what I had to do through all this to try to keep my numbers up and grow numbers, and I don't.
So,
The liquor store shouldn't, I don't know. For a later discussion, we need to hit on some of these hardline items, I believe, so we need to.
yeah, and I want you to have that space to do that, but I also just want to say that when staff's making decisions about operating,
Yeah.
they're thinking about how much staff do they even have, and are they capable of getting more?
I agree with that.
What is the opinion of their staff about working conditions and what sort of protections needed in place? When we think about hours, we're looking at what percentage of our sales do we actually do, and we have measurements of how much sales do we make between 9 and 10 p.m. And so there is an evaluation that's going on when those decisions are made. There's still fair game for conversation, and we'll make sure you get a chance to have that.
Thank you.
In the meantime, July came back a little bit, and you saw in the rec park, it's the same thing. And
Yeah.
this is, in my mind, this is about just traffic in the city, that it came up.
Right.
For August, we don't have the numbers in yet, so between August and December right now, I've got, what if we stayed at that kind of 10% down level? Because we've dialed it in and our traffic is heavy. Basically, we're saying we're going to be $250,000 to $300,000 gross less than we've been in the past. That doesn't mean we're losing that much money. There's a cost of inventory that's commensurate with that, and our markup in the 30% range is where we've been seeing our gross profits. So you think, okay, 30% of that is profits that we would have made that we're not going to make. And that's a pretty big number, $60,000 to $80,000 when you take the taxes out of it. So we're looking at this $200,000 take in 2020 and thinking, well, 60 to 80 of it is in play. And we were probably looking at, 40 or 50 above that in extra profits. So then 40 or 50 of that is money that we just didn't put into the fund balance, and then the other 30 to 40 of it is money that we're taking out of the fund balance. So we're going to end up with a lower fund balance in the liquor store in 2020 than we started with, and this is why. To think, though, that if this business gets to get back on track next year, there's no reason to believe that we won't be right back where we were at in terms of revenues. So, and I just have to think, like, as long-term as this is going to go, are we still going to be doing limited hours and all kinds of protections next July? Well, it's possible. We don't know for sure, but we know that we can do a month like July where we're only 10% down instead of a month where we're 30% down.
How are our expenses?
So we'll look at the expenses of it at the liquor store when Chris is here.
Okay, all right.
I just wanted to give you an idea that $200,000 that we've got built into the budget, for this year, we're not going to fund it. We're going to have to use liquor revenues to fund it.
Okay.
It's still built in for next year, and I'd like to think that we'll be able to get it next year, but it's one of our risk factors.
But in our budgeting
Hoping.
conversations, though, what you're telling us is that $200,000 that we usually transfer out of the liquor store fund is still going to exist. It's just going to come from a different source. Because that's a conversation that directly impacts the formation of the levy. And
Exactly. So the liquor store has $1 million that they've accumulated in their fund balance. And that accumulation has come from money beyond what we've budgeted to put into the general fund. So they've made that full 200 plus some for enough years, or, you know, there was a long time where it was 120 a year undertaking, and they made more than that, that they've accumulated this money. Now, we know what that's for, of course, because we're talking about building a new liquor store, and that's gonna cost more than $1 million. But the idea was, we were gonna put a lot of cash towards both the city hall and the liquor store project, and that was the major source of the cash that was gonna go towards the liquor store project, was the $1 million that we've saved from those proceeds. So, will it be $1 million in 2021? I don't know. And, you know, will we be able to afford that amount of cash plus the extra revenues from the liquor store that we're counting on to pay for the new bond payment? That's a little bit less sure than it was last year when we talked about it. So in recognition of that, I think that's one of the reasons why you decided we're not going to move forward on those buildings. And now we've got some time to make sure that our budget can stabilize before we make that kind of long-term financial commitment. And that feels good to me. So where do we end up with all this? That's what's next. These spreadsheets were prepared last week, so if there's any discrepancies between numbers you've seen this morning and these spreadsheets, count on the detail ones that Kim's handed out. This is just getting us into the ballpark where we're at.
I'm afraid.
And so this reflects the draft budget and spending history. This reflects the proposed, or the general revenue levy, which, whereas in the other, in the revenue sheet for the city, for the 101, for the general fund, that's at 0.
Yeah.
For taxes, which left a big gap. So
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Because we don't have that number set yet. We haven't put it in there.
Right.
It doesn't need to be in that budget spreadsheet yet. It needs to be in this one. So we'll start with that busier page. It says 2019 at the top, I see. There must be a hidden header up there, but it's actually 2021, of course. The 2021 budgeted expenses are there, except for the last couple at the bottom, which are all enterprise funds. Those enterprise funds have some effect on the levy, and all their effect is built in, so we have revenue from the $200,000 from the liquor stores already built in, but we don't have the liquor store's expense and revenues built in because we don't need them yet. Same with water, sewer, electric. So this shows you a history of our actual expenses, what we had budgeted in 2020 for expenses, what we're currently budgeting in 2021 for both expenses and revenues, and then the gap that affects the property tax levy. A few comments about this. The rec park number is big in revenue. Our conversation this morning, there's every reason to believe we can do that next year. But we still have a lot of potential risk factors that could affect that. We'll learn something in a month after school's been in person in some places in the state for a couple of weeks, and we'll see whether or not that has some sort of effect on the number of COVID cases, that the state might make some changes. If we get through that chunk of time and we don't see the state making any sort of drastic changes in terms of social distancing rules, then I think we can feel a lot more confident about being able to come back next year. We know how to operate in this environment, and we know that we're supremely in demand, so I'd like to remain optimistic. We also know that if we don't make $1.286 million in revenues at the rec park, that's got to come from somewhere. And my recommendation is the first chunk of that is that we don't fund our capital expenses
and that we take a look at something like the City Hall Liquor Store project gets pushed back a year, and we would do the same thing in the rec park and say, one or two of the projects that we had planned, we won't do as quickly as we thought we did. And that's something that the park board will discuss, what are their priorities and how are they going to resolve that. But that's the first place I would look. The second thing I would say is we look for other sources of revenue like the electric franchise fee, or other ways to make sure that all the funds are paying their fair share of all the expenses. As you can see, the general fund is $2.3 million in expenses out of a $10 million budget, and yet the general fund's still paying a significant chunk, much more than 23% of some of the fixed costs like Kim's salary, my salary, Patrick's salary, Hayden's salary, the cost of having this building. So there still might be some shifts we want to do, and we'll look at that as we continue on. But for the most part, this budget for 2021 is a budget that says we can do this next year with relatively small changes compared to how we've operated in the past. It's a small increase in expenses. It's the same staffing levels that we've had in the past. We're expecting a lot of our major revenue sources to rebound, and we think even if COVID is still a factor, that we can get major revenue sources to rebound. So I'd like to think that this is a lot of somewhat positive outlook. What does it all mean? The next spreadsheet.
That's the interpretive.
Says if we have to levy $993,000, that's just over a 2% increase in the levy this year. So we've got room to be wrong about some of these numbers in either direction and still have, I think, a pretty reasonable property tax increase for next year. So I don't foresee major changes to the department's expense budget requests coming, and I think that the council can take this conversation now and shift it to, is this in the ballpark of something you're willing to do, or do you want us to look for ways to make this number smaller, or would you like us to make this number a little bit bigger to make sure that we've got some of our risks covered? And that's kind of the place that this conversation can be with you now. Let's look, before you start that, at the bottom of this page, the debt levy. Of that $993,000 levy, $665,000 of it is general revenue, and the rest, $328,054, are payments on bonds that we're actually levying property tax dollars for. The 2004 PFA loan is property tax dollars that are levied to pay for water replacement downtown that was done in 2004.
When does that set to expire, Mike?
I think we got a couple years left.
2024.
Okay.
I'm sure that was a 20-year bond. Here's the schedule we've got for all those payments. It talks about the other
Thank
sources of money we're using to pay, because of course property taxes is not the major source of paying back this debt. That 2024 date, when this bond goes away, is kind of what we've envisioned for the timing of picking up our next debt for utility and street reconstruction. So when we think about First Street reconstruction, and we've kind of put it in our capital improvement plan for something like 2023, it was with the idea that the debt payment for that project would replace this one. And of course, it's going to be bigger than this one, but we wouldn't have them at the same time. We don't have to do it that way. That's just how it's been. We've imagined it anyway. The next one is the General Obligation Refunding 2013A. And that is a lot of different projects that were refunded together. And so there were probably four
There's five.
Or five?
Four of them, yeah, four.
that previous bonds that are a part of that. Yeah, 2004A, which was another downtown reconstruction.
The street part of it, I do believe.
I think 2005 is the street.
Okay.
2004 was a different one. 2008, which is a reconstruction project in First, Second, Third Avenues. And then 2006 USDA, which was also
Sewer,
downtown
downtown.
sewer stuff. So all of those bonds were refunded at the same time. Their payment schedules weren't changed dramatically, and so the payment amount for this 2013 kind of does cycle up and down. That 2004A, for instance, will be paid off in 2024, and so the bond payments here do fluctuate just a little bit based on that, but you can see that bond we'll be making payments on it until 2030. The next bond is the general obligation capital improvement plan bond 2017A. That's the public works garage. And this 121,000 is basically the general fund or the streets portion of the debt payment. And then you can see on the debt sheet, we've got 38%, which is the streets, an equal amount which goes to electric, and then 12% each to water and sewer. And the number is inflated a little bit because we're generally required to collect 5% more or levy 5% more than we need for these debt payments because we don't always get everything that we levy.
Well, that's what I was wondering. We don't show anything here. I'd be curious as to what we actually get every year.
Our performance has been pretty high. It's in the 90s, but this year in particular, I'm curious to see
Yeah.
what we get. The last one is 2019A EDA refunding. This is the business park construction, and it's split between the city and the county in terms of it getting paid back. The city levies this amount. The county
Levies the rest.
is paying it through an EDA levy. So it's basically the EDA that's paying the other half with a countywide levy. And they're also paying special assessments on all the properties that they own, and they're using that same source of revenue. So those special assessments and then the rest of their funds make up the other 50% of that, and you can see that is on until 2031. That's our debt picture. When we've looked at longer-term plans, we know that there's 2 more projects coming up that will require debt for sure. City Hall Liquor Store is one of them, so when we do decide to do that, there will be an additional debt payment, and that we've kind of imagined what that's going to be and how it's going to fit into the budget when we do our 3 to 5 year projections. And the other one is the First Street reconstruction. And we know kind of how that's going to fit in. So to the debt page itself,
Does that include the Fifth Avenue West, or First Street?
We've talked about that, and there's a couple other projects that on our capital improvement plan we've said, well, are we going to have to borrow for these, or are we going to use cash for them? And I think the Highway 61 project kind of put a bit of a wrench into some of that idea about how much cash we were going to have to spend on other projects. And next year, when we're done and that gets evened out, we'll know for sure. And so it's possible we'll have to borrow for when the county reconstructs Fifth Avenue West and we're going to make some sewer and water improvements there. That might just get rolled in with First Street timing-wise. I'm not sure yet. The debt service analysis shows that $328,000 in levy. There's also 113 in special assessments, 20, almost 5 in debt service reserve, meaning we're actually just using cash on hand that's designated to make some of those payments. There's 32.6 is coming from the EDA's contribution, so that plus a special assessment is the other $60,000 there, approximately. And then $704,000 that is utility money that's going towards these debt payments. So that's really the bulk of it. When the PUC looks at their budgets, they are thinking about that, 704,000, making sure that it's funded, making sure that they're keeping room in their budgets for when we do reconstruct First Street so that they'll have space to take on that next debt payment. Because the next debt payment will look like that. 70% of it will be coming out of their budgets versus the percentage that comes out of us to pay for street stuff or special assessments. Any questions about debt?
So really that PUC amount of 704 and the levy amount is what we really are hitting the city's residents with, right, overall?
And
To a
the biggest
point.
chunk of that 704 is electric, by a good stretch. Like, it might even be half of it. It certainly is all of the electric 2012, which is 213,000.
Okay,
And then the 2013B, which is 135,000. And then, well, we're already more than half of it there. And then they also pay a portion of the 2017 bond. So it's also those folks that are on the electric utility that are not in the city limits. And there's quite a few, our territory goes a few miles east and west along Highway 61.
okay.
That's rate paying, not property tax.
Yeah, so when we think about ratepayers, that just make sure we remember there's a chunk of them that don't live in the city and they're not paying these other things. But yeah, that's the impact.
Okay.
And the PUC for the year 2020, they decided not to, or they didn't raise the rates, did they?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Or they did?
Yeah,
they weren't going to, but then I think there was a 2% raise,
For electric.
electric.
yes.
Yeah.
And sewer as well, or water as well, I think. I think it was
One of
sewer,
those, One of those, yeah.
yeah. I
and
think
then
it
not
was-
water.
Do you have you guys started talking about next year yet? Not yet.
Right now, we're in the midst of our electric rate study, and
Okay.
the part that's being worked on is not the part that's ready for their conversation. We're looking at potentially the September meeting, having their initial report on that. And the rate study is, it's thinking kind of long-term on how do we fund the operations and when, the debt that's going to go away and what their long-term capital are. So we'll learn a lot about whether we need a rate increase or not, or what it,
You're the
What
one
that's
on the
gonna be.
PUC board, right?
Yeah.
And planning and zoning. You were ambitious.
Some people get to jump right in there.
Jump right in.
right. Those are both just jump right in boards.
Yeah,
Well, you
yeah.
can say he wasn't going to be on planning and zoning anymore.
Yeah, you can still do that,
You
yeah.
can still,
We do have some openings.
Right.
We'll give you a call.
I'm the council rep out here, so.
Yeah.
well,
That party's out of.
We'd have to appoint you then.
One of you will have to step in.
That is the case. So then back to this levy number. If the rec park revenues are off 50 grand, that's a 5% change one way or the other in the levy. So that's why it's actually quite feasible for you to give us direction about what sort of a number you're comfortable with, because we've got 10 different places we can look to make changes, and so we can tell you, if you want this to be zero, here are the things that we would have to do to the budget to make it zero. And in this case, it would be a $20,000 change to make it zero. If you want it to be under 5, here's the places we would add that extra money into the budget to cover some of the risk factors we've talked about.
Tell me a little bit about unallocated reserves that we have in the general fund. I've always felt that those dollars were there to help us in a case where there were completely unanticipated expenses, and obviously this is a situation where we have unanticipated expenses and changes that are completely out of our control.
Unallocated, I think, is a bit of a misnomer now for us because we've allocated some of them without actually the council voting and officially allocating. When we looked at cash we intend to spend on the city hall replacement, for instance,
when we've thought about what would we want in an emergency reserve to do the thing you're talking about, cover us for those unanticipated amounts, 30 to 50% of our general fund budget is a pretty common type of number that cities will go to. I'm not sure that we actually need to be quite that high because, you know, a lot of our revenues are not semi-annually like that. They actually come kind of on a monthly basis, and certainly, you know, come a lot faster in the summertime than the wintertime. But that's when our expenses come too. Just from a cash flow perspective, we want to have a certain amount of money in the bank to cover those fluctuations, and that's a few $100,000. And if we also said we want to have something like $500,000 to $1 million for unanticipated, I think that'd be a very conservative place for us to end up. But how much do we actually have? I'm not really sure right now, because here's what we spend it on. We spend it on our equipment replacement fund, and so we've got a spreadsheet that says this is how we're planning for it, but we don't have a separate fund. So the unallocated money in the general fund is actually paying for that. We use it to cash flow not just the general fund, but also the library fund and the liquor fund and some of the other funds where the monies are kind of flowing back and forth. But our bank account is our bank account, right? When we write a check, it comes out of this bank account, and they don't really care what our books say it's allocated to. We're also spending it on projects like Highway 61, where MnDOT says you need to pay up front for everything. Like, well, oh, okay, well then, you know, here's $2 million. And some of that was unallocated.
Yep.
And then when we're talking about, do we want to put $1 million of cash towards the City Hall project that comes from the general fund? That's where it would come from, that unallocated amount. So when we have to use it for actual unanticipated expenses like this year, the effect is that we thought it was going to be used for City Hall, but now it's not. And instead we have to wait until it can be replenished, or we have to find another source to use for that project. And I think there's still enough in there. I mean, when we're talking about this levy amount, it's almost more of a messaging decision than a financial one, because the levy at almost $1 million is still only about 10% of the city organizationally in revenues. So it makes a big impact on us as taxpayers, but it's not, we can absorb some changes organizationally.
And I think during these times, you know, businesses, homeowners, you know, a lot of people are struggling, and it's, you know, we've talked about this in times of recession when people were just having a hard time making ends meet, that this might be a time when that's the case too, and it might be appropriate to, if necessary, dig into those unallocated reserves to carry the city beyond any anticipated budget items. You know, if we don't get the revenues, or if our expenses increase somehow. I mean, I like the fact that it's this preliminary levy shows it, you know, roughly 2% increase, but I think increasing that because it's that low is, I think, sends the wrong message. You know, and I know that there's businesses that have, you know, that are struggling with this, and there's businesses that are doing well with the COVID response. But you know, I think overall, I'd like to see us hold as tight as we can to keeping the levy down and low, and letting the community know that we understand that there's challenges and difficulties people have, and it would be, I think, helpful to know from the county what kind of response they've had with tax payments. You know, if the tax payments aren't coming in, and I haven't heard that's the case. So, you know, I think I had a conversation with Brady at one point, and he said he thought things were still looking pretty good, but
yeah, we'll get an update on that for you. That, you know, the last we heard was the projections that they talked about what if we get 20% less than we levy?
Yep.
You know, what would that look like? And
Yeah, and he said he didn't think that that was anywhere near the case, or, you know, that he thought that the things were looking pretty normal and, you know, from other years, so.
So this sheet of the actual levies that have occurred, I think they're all basically this core group of council's years at this point. Like, these increases were the increases that you all approved, you know, Craig withstanding, back to 2016. The effective tax rate line item is one of the variables that helps you understand. I mean, this is figuring out, like, what does this mean to me as a taxpayer is a very, very complicated question. We like to keep it as simple as possible and say, well, we're increasing our ask by 2%. But the fact is that then it has to be distributed out to the properties based on their tax capacities, which is based on what the assessor values them at and what classification they are. And then their tax bill, of course, this is only one little small part of it. There's also all the other taxing entities that are on the tax bill. So it's hard to say what this means. But if you look at that effective tax rate, it was 51.3, 51.9, down to 49, back up to 51. In 2020, it took a big dive to 46. And that's because the property valuations were increased pretty significantly in the city. So that probably created winners and losers, because I doubt everybody's property was upgraded at the same time. But in general, this is, you know, says to me that even though we've lost a few properties from the tax rolls, we haven't really touched into that value very much. And the rate will still be good. So for those folks whose values are staying pretty flat, this is saying, you know, your tax from the city, you shouldn't expect it to change that much. Well, folks, we are now 10 minutes away from noon. You put in an awesome morning of sitting through spreadsheets and getting to chat with some department heads. There isn't any real decisions that we need you to make yet, other than to have the great conversations that you've had. I think maybe this last 10 minutes can be, is there any other bits of data you want us to gather, or any direction you'd like to give us, or, you know, if people want to leave 10 minutes early?
Is,
Go ahead, Kelly.
sorry, just a quick question. Health insurance, has that been established then for next year?
No, but the school pool through KEEP had increases of 10 to 13%. So we're budgeting for 12% in this budget. If our numbers come in better, we'll be able to reduce that.
Okay,
That's all I know. KEEP doesn't give us until sometime in September any direction.
okay. That was my only,
That's important.
yeah,
That's pretty important.
It's a big
that
one.
can make a big,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. My only thought about the numbers that we've been presented, especially getting down to the levy itself, I'm gonna be pretty honest. You know, I do believe that things are gonna bounce back next year. You know, being optimistic is great. That's one of the things I like to do. That number for the park, for the rec park, the 1.28, that's going towards, you know, of revenues going towards paying down operations, that makes me nervous. That's a big number. That's a lot bigger than what we've made this year and in some of the past years. So that's just going to say that, just to get that out there. That does make me really nervous. On the other hand, I do also agree with Tim and think that it is, my nerves can be overcome by understanding that there is significant expense that goes along with this whole COVID situation and making sure that we can offset as much of those expenses for the tax levy as possible that's definitely a priority, very high priority, keeping that levy raise low. So that's a conundrum. I'm stuck there right now. I always like to have the budgets be reflective of reality and have it be something that we can expect. Not saying that this is something we can't expect, but it also, I feel like that number just, it's big. It's very big. So I'll keep digging in. Also, I'm interested in looking forward to hearing from Chris in the liquor store to see what's happening there and what we can anticipate for that as well. That's all I have. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm with you, Jay, on the rec park one. Sometimes I think, I'm sure it's based upon the number of sites and everything else that we're selling, but if we're looking at what we had last year, where we're at this year so far, that's a pretty big change
Yeah.
so far. And then we're projecting to go ahead of 2019, basically by 26,000. I would rather come in lighter, even if we predicted what we thought for 2020, and be surprised. I think come January, which is past budget time obviously, but come January we'll have a better idea, knowing people have been here. Are they going to make reservations and want to come back now? You know, we obviously had to refund. Will the Canadian border open? I think that will make a significant difference for us. Those people are going to be clamoring to come out if they can. But those are all things that I don't expect that we'll even know by mid-September. And I think I'd rather go a little lighter on that. I'd rather stay a little lighter on our liquor store revenue, maybe using 2019 and kind of skipping the 2020 per se, that if we went back to a more normal course of the year, and then how does that look to us if we change those things? And then where do we make that up from? Because, you know, even as we looked at the debt service and what we take out of the levy and cover, what the utilities has to cover for debt service and how they look. I mean, that's where our citizens kind of get hit, is not only do I have to pay my taxes, but then I've got to pay the utilities. And I know for me, it's a high bill. And that's a big chunk of your monthly expenses, whether it's rent, home loan, payment, whatever it may be. Utilities is a big mark. So those I'd rather be cautious in those numbers and how we predict revenues, even if it is a $35,000 change or a 36, what does that mean to our levy if we drop some of those things? We talked about the electrical fee. Obviously, if we increase that, but what does that mean then on that, looking at that side of things? How does that hit them? Does it turn around and go back to the taxpayers then? Because I would like for us to kind of somehow, I can't say plateau because things just can never plateau, but I would really, really like to stay tight going into 2021 with all the unknowns that we have. And we still have this that we have to answer for and figure out, and I'm like everybody else wondering how we're going to do that, because this just is not going to hold us forever. Eventually we've got to answer to it, but where do we go with that?
And by this you mean City Hall?
City Hall
store.
liquor store.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of what I interpreted. but-
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
All of this.
taking all that philosophy into mind, the piece of it that's most direct for the council to address is, how do you want to respond to that? And if we reduce the planned revenues in this budget, it doesn't have to mean an increase in the levy. It
Right.
can mean a use of fund balance, like Tim's suggesting. It can mean a pushing back of capital projects, which is what I would recommend first. And so then it starts to become like, okay, well, there's not a lot of difference between keeping the revenue high and not planning on slowing down our capital, or lowering the revenue and taking that capital out. It's more about having the conversation and just making sure everybody understands, like, what are the risk factors, what's the band that we're in here.
You know, that feels.
And we'll
a
try to
lot-
make that really clear then, when September meeting comes around and it's time for you to pick a preliminary levy. Here's what's in the budget, here's what could look like if things go well, here's what could look like if things don't go well.
Yep.
Yeah, I was gonna say was, it seems like this is going back to the system in the rec park that we used to use, and that was projecting revenues low,
Yeah.
expenses high, and then there'd always be an amount left over at the end of the season because we weren't really accurately projecting what those expenses and revenues were. And that money did end up in the general fund, and that's kind of where I'm thinking that those reserves accumulated out of some of that.
Yeah.
And it's basically going back to that system, which I think Dave has done a remarkable job in terms of analyzing the data to come up with what I think are pretty accurate numbers. When we use those other lower revenue projections, we always beat them by $40,000, $50,000, $70,000 a year, and that money just ended up, and we ended up levying, for that money, but went into the general fund reserves. And I think that by lowering those expectations for revenue, we're back into that same situation, where maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, but I think Dave has got a pretty good handle on where things might end up, so.
Well, and maybe, money numbers, you can kind of put whatever. I guess I'd be curious, and that's something I should have thought of, that's on me ahead of time, to say, what are you showing to be your usage for tent sites, for electric water, for full hookups, for daily, for monthly? Those are some things, because then also, how do we adjust our rates? Because I don't want to eventually go, well, we're just going to keep zooming those way up, because eventually people will go, well, I can go and tent somewhere else cheaper. Never mind you. I can be on a lake someplace that,
I don't know that we're ever gonna find that eventual.
I know.
Our demand has been so incredibly strong.
Yep. Yep.
It's tough
for
to
me-
tent where you can walk to town and buy a pizza.
Yeah, I
mean,
know.
It's so much more
To me, that's
about-
not camping, but
It's
yeah.
about the philosophy of, do we feel like we're worth it? Do we feel like we're
Yeah.
charging too much because, is it okay for us to charge that much? Is it too elitist? I mean, it's almost more about that than it is about the actual demand, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I think we could name our price, particularly on some of those sites, we could literally name our price and get it anytime we want in July and August, and that doesn't feel right either, right?
No.
So, but
No.
keeping in mind, what's the purpose of that? It's, Dave has to keep focused on providing great service to those customers.
Yep.
But the purpose of it is not for them. The purpose of it is for the people who live here. And so then we've got that push and pull of trying to take care of the customers while maximizing the taking care of the residents by producing as much revenue as it can. And it's a tricky balance, which the park board digs into a lot more detail than you get to. But Dave does prepare some memos that I think can help answer some of those questions for you. So we'll make sure that when they do their rate increase memos, that you all get to see that too.
Yeah, and at some point, it's not going to change our levy thing amount, obviously, but I still think we need to go back to, are we ever going to change or look at our North House issue? Or are we going to leave it until 25 years expires? So,
So I don't have to be
again,
discussed.
that's not something that's gonna switch these numbers largely, but it, however it got set up could have an effect at some point someday, so.
Well, hey, we'll see you all in a few hours, huh? We're gonna do this one remotely.
Yeah. Are we doing remotely tonight?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I know I'd love some feedback from you on how this went at a later time. I think it worked okay for this setting, but
Yeah.
I'm a little bit concerned about the product that we're putting out there and how accessible it is for people to follow this conversation. We'll have to look at that and kind of figure it out. So, you know, if I was to look at this setting and think about doing a public hearing with planning and zoning issues, I didn't think it would work yet.
Yeah.
And we'll keep trying on that.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for
Okay.
all
Thank
your
you.
efforts
Thank you.
for this.